Chapter 391. Ning Ke, who was imprisoned in the cliff cave, had to get rid of the strong inhibition left by the headmaster of the academy if he wanted to break out. He did not expect to defeat the headmaster of the academy, nor was he willing to destroy the great spirit in his body. Therefore, he could only choose the second method, to transform the great spirit so that it could live in harmony with the chi of heaven and earth in nature, or even become one and completely erase the difference between the two. According to the book, The Origin of the Breath of Heaven and Earth, the natural chi of heaven and earth was the same thing as the true chi and great spirit in the body of the devil's doctrine cultivators. However, with the passage of time and the difference in substance, they gradually had completely different characteristics. Ning Ke thought that he could go back and use the snow mountain and ocean of chi, the passageway, and the whirlpool to directly decompose the great spirit in his body into the smallest particles and turn it into its original appearance. Then he could use other methods to smear the colors of nature to disguise it as the aura of heaven and earth. However, when he really started to try, he found that he could not even take the first step of this method. After countless painful failures, he finally believed that no one could be the enemy of such a great existence as time. After pondering for several nights, he suddenly realized that the two books given to him by the headmaster of the academy were not necessarily for two different methods, but should be related to each other. Therefore, he tried to use the no-boundary spirit of the academy to simulate the great spirit into the chi of heaven and earth in nature. Just as Chen Pipi once said, the no-boundary spirit of the academy was the fire, the stove was his body, and the great spirit was the food in the pot. What he needed to do was to use the no-boundary spirit of the academy to control the fire, and use his wisdom, experience, and knowledge as the seasoning to fry the great spirit in his body into a plate of fragrant chi of heaven and earth. After some calculation and deduction, Ning Ke felt that this method should be feasible and immediately began to prepare. The target he chose to simulate was the water talisman that he was most familiar with and the first to understand. He used the fu paper to condense the purest water and carefully observed it for a long time. He carefully analyzed the characteristics of the aura and the smallest differences, and then wrote it down in his notes. At the same time, he did not forget to cultivate the no-boundary spirit of the academy. When he was sure that he had completely mastered all the characteristics and taste of the chi of heaven and earth condensed by the water talisman and had mastered the essence of the no-boundary spirit of the academy, he officially began the transformation. As dusk shrouded the mountain, he sat cross-legged on the praying mat and slowly closed his eyes. When Chao Wu entered the cave, he slowly opened his eyes and stood up from the cattail hassock. The psyche power entered his body and flowed slowly. Ning Ke looked at the whirlpool in his abdomen and silently sensed the Great Spirit. When he finally confirmed that the Great Spirit in his body had turned into the chi of heaven and earth with the characteristics of water talismans under the disguise of the no-boundary spirit, he could not help but reveal a look of surprise. After a while, Ning Ke wiped the blood from the corner of his lips and silently looked at the flying dust particles at the entrance of the cliff cave. He recalled the situation when he tried to pass through the entrance but triggered the inhibition and fell into deep thought. Under the disguise of the no-boundary spirit of the academy, the great spirit in his body had changed its appearance and become one of the aura of heaven and earth. Why did it still trigger the inhibition of the cliff cave? How did the simple aura left by the headmaster discover that the great spirit flowing in his body was still the great spirit and not the chi of heaven and earth in the cool breeze and flowing clouds? The morning light shone through the blue sky on the other side of the precipice. Ning Ke squinted because of the piercing light. Suddenly, he thought of something. There was no completely colorless light in the world, not even a completely monochromatic light. At least it was like that in the world he was in now. Even if it could not be seen with the naked eye, those invisible waves still had their own colors. Just like the seemingly holy Haotian divine light, it was actually composed of many colors of light. Similarly, in nature, there was no completely monochromatic chi of heaven and earth. The chi of heaven and earth in the cool breeze and flowing clouds, green trees and white stones seemed to be different. In fact, since the creation of the world, the qi of heaven and earth had gone through hundreds of millions of years of precipitation and integration. Although they still retained their respective characteristics, they had already taken on other auras. Only the qi of heaven and earth condensed and summoned by talisman paper or tactical arrays was absolutely pure. Ning Ke walked to the cliff cave and took out a piece of talisman paper after a moment of contemplation. He touched it with his psyche power and made it condense into a fireball, which floated out of the cave with the wind. According to his previous thinking, the weak fireball contained the qi of heaven and earth. Then it should not be discovered by the aura of the headmaster and he could easily enter and exit the cave. There was a light sizzling sound. The weak fireball floated to the entrance of the cliff cave and suddenly died out. The inhibition at the cliff cave suddenly appeared and then disappeared. Ning Ke looked at it silently and his face turned a little pale. It turned out that the inhibition left by the headmaster not only did not allow the Great Spirit to pass through, but also any unnatural aura of heaven and earth. In other words, as long as it was a cultivator, even if the psyche power in his sense of perception could only cause a very small fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth, it would not be able to pass through the cliff cave. Ning Ke thought of the situation of his senior brothers and sisters who came to visit him a few days ago. He noticed that none of them entered the cliff cave or even stretched out their hands towards the line. Only then did he realize that his senior brothers and sisters had probably already known about the incredible nature of the inhibition. He suddenly thought of something and called Sang Sang into the cave. He stared at the little handmaiden who could enter and leave freely and felt that his thoughts were even more confused. If the headmaster's inhibition was targeted at the unnatural psyche power, talisman power, and the Devil's Doctrine cultivator's genuine qi, then Sang Sang should have left some Taoist aura in her body when she cultivated with the Divine Priest of Light. Why did the inhibition have no effect on her? Ning Ke stopped thinking about it and continued to study how to break through the restriction. After confirming the true meaning of the inhibition in the cliff cave, he realized that if he wanted to simulate the Great Spirit in his body into the qi of heaven and earth in the natural world, then he could not simulate just one of them. He needed to simulate countless kinds of qi of heaven and earth, regardless of the quantity, but all of them must be present. The problem was that there were countless kinds of qi of heaven and earth in the natural world. Even if he had the no-boundary spirit of the academy and could observe the characteristics of various kinds of qi with talismans, how could he simulate all of them with the Great Spirit? The Great Spirit in his body was like a basket of vegetables. No matter how many seasonings were put in, no matter how precise the fire was, could he stir-fry this basket of vegetables into more than 300 dishes? And there was a more critical problem. If I give you a handful of vegetables, can you cook a bowl of roasted pork? Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang and asked. Sang Sang thought for a while and said, "Of course not. But yesterday Mr. First brought a few pounds of fresh pork. If you want to eat roasted pork, I can cook it for you later." Ning Ke did not have too much time to be depressed. He immediately threw himself into studying and solving the problem. The problem left by the headmaster of the academy was too difficult. It seemed that there were only 3 correct answers, but no matter which one it was, it required a lot of courage. Some of the answers could be seen clearly, but found that there was an extremely complicated code attached to the answer. With his current state and ability, it was impossible for him to solve the code, because the code vaguely pointed to the origin of the world and the composition of nature. It was also at this time that he thought of the old woman in the blue robe in the front yard of the academy. In the mathematics question of the academy's entrance exam, Xia Qingyun first used the method of exhaustion and got an almost infinite number. However, Ning Ke directly got the result at one glance, so he got the only A+. Ning Ke was very good at studying, or rather, he was good at taking exams. Exams like mathematics were often a showcase of one's talent. Therefore, he had always looked down on his peers who did not know how to use formulas and answer questions. They only knew how to do calculations. But now he did not have a ready-made formula, nor could he find any skills, so he could only pick up the stupid method that he used to look down on and try to solve it by force. Solving by force was exhaustion. The so-called exhaustion was complete induction, trying the answers one by one. As long as he had enough time and patience, he would eventually find the only correct code. Ning Ke tried to solve the inhibition of the cliff cave by force, but there was a small difference from solving the code. This was because he needed to find the characteristics of countless kinds of qi of heaven and earth, and to model the Great Spirit in his body into them. This was equivalent to finding countless passwords and then combining them together. Only in this way could he see the final answer. This method was very violent and beautiful, but in fact it was very clumsy and helpless. The word exhaustion in exhaustion was a characteristic of this method. However, from another perspective, it could also be understood as the solver had exhausted all of his wisdom and could not find any other way to solve the problem. That was why he used this method in an extremely sad and sorrowful manner. In the following days, Ning Ke began to use the exhaustion method to analyze and simulate the qi of heaven and earth. He did not know how many kinds of qi there were, but he did not rush to touch the inhibition. Because he was very clear that this must be an extremely complicated and even magnificent project. Not to mention 3 months, even 300 years would not be enough to see the result. But he still kept trying. Because he had only given himself 3 months. If he did not put in his best efforts in these 3 months, he would have a lot of regrets when he remembered that he had destroyed the Great Spirit in the past. Ning Ke became more and more silent in the cliff cave. He did not have time to comb his hair, which scattered behind him, making him look a little depressed. His face became more and more haggard, but the luster in his eyes became brighter and brighter. Chen Pipi often came to visit him. Looking at him now, he could not bear to let him torture himself like this, nor could he bear to let him give up halfway. So he just stayed silent like him. Other senior brothers and senior sisters also came to visit and gave all the herbs and food they collected to Sang Sang, so that she could cook them at any time to keep up the spirit of youngest brother. Tang Xiaotang cultivated with Yu Lian, but she was still miserable. She held Sang Sang's hand and complained when she could occasionally play on the cliff. But when she looked at Ning Ke in the cave, she felt a little ashamed. Just like that, the days passed day by day, and spring gradually deepened. Chapter 3, Try to get out before 1. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 392. Ning Ke, who was in the cliff cave, had no chance to get close to the new wildflowers in the fields. Fortunately, he could often see bouquets of flowers in the cave. Sang Sang would return to Chang'an every once in a while to talk to her parents in the scholar's mansion. But she refused to stay overnight and would rush back to the academy on the same day. She would pick flowers on the way and bring them to Ning Quebec. Ning Ke was imprisoned in the cliff cave and could only learn about what happened outside the academy from Sang Sang and Chen Pipi. And these things seemed to have something to do with him. The Buddhism sect and the Yueluan kingdom were shocked and indignant that the sadhu from the Xiankong temple was killed by him in the Morning Street. However, this was a direct challenge, so the disciples of the Buddhism sect could only remain silent. The Yueluan kingdom, perhaps because of Aunt Cuny Matty who had lost her beloved son, was overwhelmed by anger. The monarch wrote a letter and sent it to Chang'an, in which he asked the Tang Emperor to punish the murderer. The Tang Empire had never been provoked like this. The emperor was furious and summoned the envoy of Yueluan kingdom to scold the Yueluan kingdom, calling the Yueluan kingdom an idiot. Finally, seeing that the Yueluan kingdom had lost a future master and the Tang Empire was very proud, His Majesty did not send troops to teach the Yueluan kingdom. Instead, he issued an imperial edict that from that day on, the White Tower Temple of Yueluan Kingdom could not preach in the Tang Empire, and the sadhu who were scattered in the countryside must leave the country immediately, or they would be severely punished. Such a strong response naturally shocked the Buddhism sect. The abbot of Lank Temple wrote a letter to Master Huang Yang in Chang'an, confirming that the Tang Empire was only targeting the Yueluan Kingdom and the White Tower Temple, and that its attitude towards the Buddhism sect had not changed. The academy would still send people to attend the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. The West Hill Divine Palace remained silent in this incident. When the aftermath of this incident was about to fade, the West Hill Divine Palace suddenly sent a delegation to Chang'an. The delegation was led by the great divine priest of Revelation. There were more than 100 people in it, including the 3 priests of the Revelation Department and the Judicial Department, as well as the personal secretary of the Hierarch Lord. Compared to the delegation that sent Prince Long Qing to the Tang Empire 2 years ago, this delegation was much larger in both scale and rank. The Great Divine Priest of Revelation was one of the 3 great divine priests of the West Hill Divine Palace. In the world illuminated by Haotian's divine light, especially in countries other than the Tang Empire, his status was even higher than that of a king. For a bigwig like the Great Divine Priest of Revelation, even if he left the Peach Mountain and left the West Hill, he would usually quietly cultivate in the secular world. He would rarely appear in front of the world, let alone visit other countries. The destination of the Great Divine Priest of Revelation this time was the Tang Empire, which was the only country in the world that dared to talk to the West Hill on an equal footing. It immediately caused a tidal wave of shock in the world. The royal families of the South Jin Kingdom, Yueluan Kingdom, Yan Kingdom, Song Kingdom, and Great River Kingdom were all nervously guessing the real intention of the West Hill Divine Palace. The West Hill Divine Palace commanded Haotian Taoism and had hundreds of millions of believers in the world. Even though it was the South School of Haotian Taoism that handled the specific religious affairs in the Tang Empire, it still held a very high position in the hearts of the Tang Empire's people. Therefore, the imperial court of the Tang Empire would naturally not treat it like the Yueluan Kingdom. Since receiving the request of the West Hill Divine Palace for a visit, the imperial court of the Tang Empire began to make careful and detailed preparations. For example, the reception standards, when His Majesty would meet the great divine priest, and what kind of etiquette should be used when they met. It was naturally impossible for His Majesty to kneel like other monarchs in the world, and it seemed inappropriate for the great divine priest of Revelation to kneel to His Majesty. In short, there were countless details that needed to be taken care of. The imperial court of the Tang Empire did not have to guess the intention of the great divine priest of Revelation's visit to Chang'an. Even though this made many people nervous and confused, the people in Chang'an were very clear about the purpose of this great divine priest of Revelation's visit. As spring gradually deepened, the great divine priest of Revelation and his delegation finally arrived in Chang'an city. After going through a series of complicated and meticulous procedures, the West Hill delegation completed the visit on the surface, but they did not intend to leave. The great divine priest of Revelation lived in the Southern Gate Temple. The reason for this was that the real matter of the West Hill delegation's visit to Chang'an city had not been completed. To be more precise, the person that the great divine priest of Revelation was looking for had not been found yet. The emperor and ministers of the Tang Empire did not care about this matter at all, because the key to this matter was the academy. The person that the great divine priest of Revelation was looking for was also in the academy. She was serving her young master in the cliff cave. One day, the great divine priest of Revelation suddenly appeared in the mansion of Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library Pavilion. Even though Zheng Jing was a first-grade Grand Secretary of the Tang Empire, he was so excited that he almost fainted when he suddenly found the great divine priest of West Hill, who was highly respected by the believers of Haotian, in front of him. One day later, the priest of the Revelation Department, Cheng Lixue, tentatively asked Li Qingshan, the nation master of the Tang Empire, if the great divine priest of Revelation wanted to enter the academy to visit the headmaster of the academy. After thinking for a while, Li Qingshan agreed to ask him in the academy. Half a day later, Li Qingshan brought back some bad news for the West Hill delegation. The headmaster of the academy said that if the great divine priest of Revelation wanted to visit the academy, it would not be a problem. After all, Li Qingshan had been here before. However, if you wanted to do that thing, then it would be meaningless even if you saw me. Because whether the little girl went to West Hill or not, her parents could not control it, and neither could I. The person who could control it would not know when he would come out. If the West Hill delegation just stayed in Chang'an City, especially the great divine priest of Revelation, as time went by, the countries would become more and more anxious, and things would become a little awkward. Fortunately, at this time, the long-arranged event finally happened in the northern wilderness according to the original plan. It successfully attracted everyone's attention, and they forgot about the West Hill delegation in Chang'an City. Under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace, the allied forces of the countries in the Central Plains went deep into the wilderness and met with the cavalry of the left king's palace in the grassland. They launched an attack on the desolate man's tribe that had just moved south from the cold region of the far north for a year. The main force to attack the desolate man's tribe was the cavalry of the left king's palace and the army of the Yan kingdom. The most powerful northeast border military of the Tang Empire was strangely responsible for bringing up the rear and providing logistics. When the cavalry of a tribe in the left king's palace rebelled because of the uneven distribution of resources, the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, which had been silent for a long time, rushed hundreds of miles and used a night to suppress the rebellion. Then, all the men of the rebellious tribe lost their heads. The battle with the desolate man was very bloody and tragic. However, when people saw the battle report, they found that the most bloody and tragic scene still happened in the hands of General Xiahou. This great General Xiahou, who was known for his ruthlessness and strength, continued to seize military exploits one after another, winning wave after wave of praise from the great Tang court. According to the judgment of many people in the court, when great General Xiahou retired after autumn as promised, he would definitely receive the highest honor. Lu Yiqing had been sitting on the futon outside the side door of the academy for more than 2 months. He was covered in dust and looked haggard, but his eyes were extremely bright. After talking to the old woman in the blue robe of the academy, he sat on the futon and meditated for 3 days and 3 nights. He did not drink or eat, but he did not choose to leave. Instead, he became more and more silent. It was also when he opened his eyes again that his eyes became brighter, like a sharp sword that had been washed by spring water, rippling with a sense of clarity. Even when he was meditating, his state actually increased. Many people in the cultivation world were watching the side door of the academy. Many people already knew that Ning Kei's retreat was to cultivate talisman and martial arts at the same time. No one had heard of what it meant to cultivate talisman and martial arts at the same time, and few people believed that anyone could do it. They could easily tell that Ning Kei finally realized that his state was too weak after a series of victories, so he chose to cultivate in seclusion. In the West Hill Divine Kingdom, because the great divine priest of Revelation had left with the diplomatic corps, and because of the rebellion of the divine priest of Light, which had been buried in the darkest depths of the scriptures, Peach Mountain seemed a little lonely. And the Jishou Abbey, which was far away in the deep mountains, was already used to this kind of loneliness. Therefore, when a soft sounded in the hut where the 7 tomes of arcane was enshrined, the sound was so clear. The Sun hand scroll, in the middle of a piece of paper, still had the lonely name of the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu. But a name in the inconspicuous corner had disappeared without a trace. A middle-aged Taoist priest stood in front of the Sun hand scroll with a somewhat complicated expression. Haotian's divine light shone on the world, and the Sun hand scroll recorded the names and states of all the cultivators in the world. When a cultivator's name completely disappeared, there were only 3 possibilities. That cultivator had already crossed the iron threshold and broken through the 5 states. Or that cultivator had died and everything was for naught. Or, someone had used an inhibition to block the way of heaven from looking down. But who could have such an incredible ability? Of course it was the headmaster. The middle-aged Taoist priest sighed with emotion and remained silent. For example, they wanted to see who was more powerful between the students of the second floor of the academy and the brother of the Sage of Sword. Or they wanted to see Mr. 13 of the academy beaten like a dog. In short, many people looked forward to the day when Ning Ke broke out of seclusion. The West Hill Diplomatic Corps in Chang'an and the great divine priest of Revelation who was meditating in the Southern Gate Temple were also waiting for him to come out. But no one thought that Ning Ke might not come out in this lifetime. It was already late in the spring. The wisteria in the roofed corridor on the cliff plateau was lush and green, blocking all the sunlight, making the entrance of the cave extremely quiet. Light purple flowers were in full bloom between the branches, extremely beautiful. Ning Ke walked to the entrance of the cliff cave and casually tied up his loose hair. He leaned against the stone wall and looked at the greenery in front of him and the green fields beyond the clouds in the distance. He said, "Only a destitute and desperate person with no passion for life can torture himself like this. So this is what it means to exhaust oneself." Sang Sang walked to him and looked at the hanging purple flowers in the roofed corridor. She thought that her daily care had finally paid off. She said happily, "I heard that the fruits will be more beautiful in autumn. Those fruits are long, like beans, and the stew is delicious." Ning Ke said, "Autumn? Then we definitely won't be able to see it." Sang Sang suddenly froze and asked in surprise, "Young master, can you go out now?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "The meat has been stewed. The only thing left is to add the beans and stew it. It's almost ready. Today's 3 chapters have cost me 11,000 yuan. But I have to continue writing. There must be more, but it will definitely be early in the morning. Don't wait for me. Go to sleep. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 393. Today, the main dish of lunch in the cliff cave was braised pork. Ning Ke squatted at the entrance of the cave, holding a bowl of rice and chewing the greasy fat in his mouth. He looked at the clear view of the precipice and asked vaguely, Chen Pippi used to come and snatch food whenever he smelled the fragrance of the meat. But recently, he came less often than before. Even if he came, he would leave in a hurry after a short while. What on earth is he busy with? Sang Sang pushed aside the braised pork in the pot with a spatula, leaving only the gravy soaking in the white rice. She took the bowl and squatted down beside him. After thinking for a while, she said, "I don't know either. But the day before yesterday, Tang Xiaotang mentioned that he often helped her solve her problems in cultivation recently." Ning Ke was startled and remembered the conversation about the beast 2 months ago. He sneered and said, "Solve her cultivation problems? My teacher asked him to help me, not to help that little girl. Taoism and the devil's doctrine are always the same. Let me ask you, who was the beast in the back of the mountain today?" Sang Sang didn't understand what he was talking about. Ning Ke suddenly looked at her and asked, "I heard that the great divine priest of Revelation has been to the Grand Secretary's mansion?" Sang Sang nodded and continued eating. Ning Ke asked again, "So you didn't go back to the Grand Secretary's mansion this time?" Sang Sang lowered her head and hummed. Ning Ke looked at her slightly black forehead and asked in a low voice, "What do you think about this? Look at the Divine Hall's behavior. They really take you, the successor of the Divine Priest of Light, seriously. I have never heard of any successor of the Divine Priest being so valued by the Divine Hall. They even sent a great Divine Priest to pick you up." Sang Sang said, "Young master, what do you think about this?" Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "Although I don't like the West Hill Divine Palace and have never imagined that you would really become the great Divine Priest of Light, I still think it is ridiculous. But if there is such a chance, I have to admit that it is very glorious and powerful. It will be a pity to miss it. Sang Sang suddenly put down the rice bowl in her hand and looked at him seriously and said, "Now it seems that we should think more about how to break through than these small things." The stupid bird finally flew into the forest first, and the stupid man finally got his reward. After racking his brains for dozens of days, Ning Ke once again showed incredible perseverance and patience in the face of a desperate situation. Just like when he walked out of Min Mountain, climbed the old library, and comprehended talismans in the storm, he completed the seemingly impossible task and successfully mastered all the essential characteristics of the aura of heaven and earth. This also meant that he could finally change the Great Spirit in his body into the natural chi of heaven and earth, so that when he walked out of the cliff cave, he would not trigger the inhibition set by the headmaster. He was confident that he could do it. It was also because of this confirmation that when he failed again and was shaken back into the cliff cave by the restriction, his face became extremely pale, and a rare emotion similar to despair appeared on his face. His judgment was right. The aura left by the headmaster at the entrance of the cliff cave did not react to the Great Spirit in his body. However, to his surprise, when his right foot was about to step over the line, his body suddenly hit an invisible but indestructible wall. Why was that? In the depths of the cliff cave, Ning Ke hugged his head and curled up between his knees. It took him a long time to suppress the despair and thoughts of abandoning himself in his heart, and he began to think seriously again. Suddenly, he understood, but he was really in despair. The aura left by the headmaster at the entrance of the cliff cave would trigger the inhibition once it sensed the Great Spirit or the unnatural chi of heaven and earth. It would simply summon the endless chi of heaven and earth between the cliffs, and then condense into a violent sea, swallowing anyone who tried to break through. And when no one with the unnatural chi of heaven and earth tried to pass through the inhibition, the aura left by the headmaster would become a wall, a fence. Compared to the violent sea of chi of heaven and earth, the aura did not seem that scary, but it was, after all, the aura left by the headmaster. How could it be that easy to pass through? Perhaps it was really easy. Even with Ning Ke's cultivation at the lower level of the see-through state, he could still pass it. This was because he had the Great Spirit and he had learned the method of cultivating chi recorded at the end of the book, Examination of the Origin. As long as he could cultivate the Great Spirit in his body to a majestic level, or even a little more vigorous, he could probably break through the wall left by the headmaster. In other words, he was just short of one breath, the Great Spirit. However, the more powerful the Great Spirit in his body, the more dangerous it would be to trigger the inhibition when passing through the cliff cave. Once the inhibition was triggered, the sea of chi of heaven and earth would become more violent. He could indeed turn all the Great Spirit in his body into the natural chi of heaven and earth, but it had already exhausted him for 3 months, not to mention a larger amount of Great Spirit. He really did not have the energy and determination to repeat the process that he had repeated countless times. It was precisely because of this that Ning Ke had stopped cultivating the Great Spirit in the past 2 months. And he vaguely understood that if he really continued cultivating the Great Spirit, he would not only be tortured like now, but he might even end up like his youngest uncle. This possibility made him vigilant and even afraid. This was a contradiction. This was the last question that the headmaster had given him. To see the light in a hopeless situation, but there was a great risk hidden in the light. At such a time, what would you choose? Would you continue to wait in silence, waiting for the sky to become brighter, or the sky to never brighten again? Or would you gamble with your life, bravely or crazily take another step towards the sky? Sitting on the cliff cave floor, Ning Ke painfully thought for a long time, but he did not come up with an answer. Instead, his mood became more and more depressed, and he muttered to himself, "Is there no end?" He did not know who he was asking this question to, the headmaster or God. His voice was a little louder, but it was still the same 4 words, "Is there no end?" He suddenly stood up, grabbed the bamboo chair beside him, and forcefully threw it against the cliff cave wall. With a crisp sound, the bamboo chair broke into pieces and became a pile of rubbish. He had been imprisoned in the cliff cave for 3 whole months, seeing hope, then disappointment, and then despair. He kept repeating this process, which was boring and tiresome. At this moment, he finally broke down. Is there no end? Ning Ke shouted angrily, grabbed everything he could grab, and forcefully threw them against the cliff wall: bamboo chair, soup urn, water basin, brush, ink, paper, inkstone, and even the 2 books. It seemed that this was the only way he could vent the extremely depressed and unresigned sullenness in his heart. Everything in the cliff cave was smashed by him. A bunch of wildflowers that Sang Sang had picked from the waterfall on the other side of the mountain yesterday was scattered on the ground by him. He fell down among the flowers, looking lonely with his head down, looking extremely pitiful, like a lost child who could never find his way home. Suddenly, he remembered his first encounter with the headmaster of the academy. It was on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes, and it ended with an unreasonable blow from the headmaster of the academy with a short stick. Ning Ke still did not understand why a bigwig like the headmaster of the academy would lose his composure like a street vendor, stamping with rage and hitting his own student with a stick. At this time, he finally understood how the headmaster of the academy felt at that time. It was also that blow from the headmaster of the academy that reminded him of the real principles of the academy. The academy taught its students that if they were sure that their actions were correct after careful consideration, then they should not be afraid or evasive when encountering difficulties. Instead, they should move forward bravely and use all means to uphold their own principles. This was the principle of the academy. In other words, when the enemy was too powerful to be reasoned with, then there was no need to reason with it. Ning Ke raised his head and looked at the exit of the cliff. At this moment, he did not think of any predecessor, because the only predecessor on this path was youngest uncle, and youngest uncle had finally walked down the path of destruction. He thought of the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism, starting from the Tao addict Yi Hongyu, to the great divine priest on the Peach Mountain, from the world wayfarer Yi Su who carried a wooden sword on his back, to the legendary Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey who wore a fluttering indigo robe, until finally his eyes fell on the clear blue sky outside the cliff. I will continue to cultivate the Great Spirit, and I will try again. I don't care if I will trigger the inhibition set by you, teacher, and I don't care what I might encounter in the future. He murmured, because I don't want to stay here anymore. I want to go out. Fuck you. Sang Sang was washing dishes in the hut when she heard the sound of things falling in the cliff cave. She quickly wiped her hands and was about to go and have a look when she heard these words again. She could not help but feel slightly surprised. She thought to herself, you are locked in the cave for seclusion. How did that Amtida of the Buddhism sect in the Yueluan kingdom offend you? She walked to the entrance of the cliff cave and was about to go in when she saw the mess inside. Ning Ke was sitting on the ground with his legs crossed, looking peaceful, like a statue sitting on the ancient ruins. In the past 2 months, Ning Ke had been trying to transform the Great Spirit, but he had never cultivated it. The vortex deep in his lower abdomen was as calm as a small pond. At this moment, the Great Spirit seemed to have clearly sensed his determination and slowly flowed. Perhaps because he had been lonely for too long, when the Great Spirit flowed, it completely ignored Ning Ke's psyche power and suddenly began to speed up, faster and faster. In the end, the vortex in Ning Ke's abdomen began to shake and spin almost crazily. The calm small pond suddenly became violent, as if it was about to roll up a storm. The chi of heaven and earth in the cliff cave came from all directions like a slanting wind and drizzle, and then desperately poured into his body. Ning Ke could clearly feel the current situation and could not help but feel a little frightened. He thought that if he allowed so much chi of heaven and earth to pour into his body, he would very likely explode and die, just like those who were selected as disciples by the devil's doctrine and died tragically at the first stage. For a moment, he wanted to stop the violent vortex in his abdomen. But he did not know whether it was because he could not stop, or because he was so eager to regain his freedom that he wanted to risk his life to bear the consequences of this sudden situation. Anyway, he did not sit down. Feeling the qi of heaven and earth continuously pouring into his body, Ning Kei's face turned slightly pale and his body trembled slightly. But he still sat firmly on the ground with his legs crossed and did not move at all. The breeze between the cliffs seemed to have sensed the abnormality in the cliff cave and swept over with a whistling sound. It turned into a gale with wind and gravel, passing through the cliffside huts and roofed corridors and directly pouring into the cave. Sang Sang held the stone wall at the entrance of the cave and struggled to stabilize her body. She looked inside worriedly and wanted to shout loudly to wake Ning Kei up. But in such a strong mountain wind, she could not open her mouth at all. Ning Kei closed his eyes and sat quietly in the cave. His mind was completely focused on the soaring Great Spirit in his body, and he did not know what was happening outside at all. His clothes fluttered like a battle flag in the wilderness. The mountain wind whistled in the cliff cave, and the pieces of the bamboo chair, brush and inkstone that he had smashed earlier directly floated up and circled around his body in the air. Occasionally, they would hit the wall of the cave and become even finer pieces. The stone wall of the cliff cave looked extremely hard, but under the intensive impact like a storm, the outermost layer of the stone wall gradually cracked, and many stone chips rustled and fell. On one of the stone walls, 4 vague words appeared. The qi of heaven and earth between the cliffs entered the cliff cave with the wind and kept pouring into Ning Kei's body. In an instant, it filled all the acupoints in his snow mountain and ocean of qi. Then it poured into his body and kept filling and occupying, unwilling to give up any place, even the smallest acupoint. Ning Kei felt that his body was swelling, as if he had become a bag full of wine. He even felt that his hair and eyelashes were filled with the qi of heaven and earth. The whirlpool in his abdomen became bigger and bigger, and the speed of the edge naturally became faster and faster. He even faintly felt the pain of his internal organs being cut open. He knew that if he allowed this situation to continue, he would explode and die from the continuous influx of the qi of heaven and earth. But he still did not stop, and just silently muttered the 4 words, waiting for the arrival of the last moment. Just when the qi of heaven and earth completely filled every part of his body and began to invade his real body, in a very short moment, Ning Kei used his strong willpower to resist the nausea caused by the shaking of his sense of perception and the extremely terrible pain, and let his psyche power fall on the whirlpool in his body. For many years, he had been constantly meditating because he wanted to cultivate. Whether he could cultivate or not, he meditated to cultivate psyche power. He meditated when he was sleeping, when he was in a daze, when he was writing, when he was brewing medicine for Sang Sang. He meditated all the time. He had paid a perseverance and desire that ordinary cultivators could not bear. So after he could cultivate, he had an abundant psyche power that ordinary cultivators could not imagine. So when the qi of heaven and earth had poured into his sense of perception, squeezing out the last bit of space and dispersing almost all of his psyche power, he could still maintain the last bit of clarity in psyche power. When the psyche power fell, a light suddenly flashed in Ning Kei's already muddled sense of perception. The light was like lightning, and it woke him up instantly. He thought of the simple aura left by the headmaster at the cliff cave. That simple aura could summon all the qi of heaven and earth between the cliffs, and then compress and condense it into a square rain sea, isolating the cliff cave from the outside world. Since the qi of heaven and earth could be compressed, then the qi of heaven and earth in his body could also be compressed. The 3 months that he was imprisoned in the cliff cave turned into countless images that quickly flashed in front of his eyes. The inhibition at the entrance of the cliff cave, the violent sea of qi of heaven and earth, the forbidden book called Origin of Qi of Heaven and Earth, the last qi cultivation skill in the forbidden book, the nameless book recorded the Academy's no-boundary spirit, and countless kinds of qi of heaven and earth. These fragments of information kept colliding and combining, deconstructing and reconstructing. It turned out that to be free, one needed freedom. Ning Ke no longer worried about whether his body would explode, nor did he care about the dizziness and pain. He just calmly looked at the whirlpool in his body, letting it freely spin and expand at a high speed. The most critical moment came. The majestic chi of heaven and earth occupied Ning Ke's body. At this moment, a wonderful scene happened. The rapidly expanding Great Spirit whirlpool that was about to break through space seemed to have become a little thin because of the extreme expansion. Although it would soon be filled by new chi of heaven and earth, at that moment, the number of the whirlpool itself seemed to be unable to resist the gravity of the center of the whirlpool, and there was a slight tremble. Then the whirlpool began to shrink. Although the speed of the whirlpool's contraction was very slow at the beginning, it accelerated very quickly. In a split second, it had actually shrunk to only half of its original size. This was no longer a contraction, but a collapse. Chapter 394. In front of the precipice was the sky, but there was still no echo. Ning Ke's shout disappeared not far from the cliff. It did not linger for 3 years. Looking at the beautiful scenery of the precipice, Ning Ke suddenly turned around and walked into the cliff cave. But when he was about to enter the cave, he subconsciously stopped. Sang Sang said, "If you want to have a look, go in and have a look. I will accompany you." Ning Ke nodded and walked in with her again. He had been imprisoned in this cliff cave for 3 months, and his spirit and willpower had been severely tested. During those nights of despair and contemplation, he had thought countless times that if he could break through the inhibition and get out of this cliff cave, he would immediately take Sang Sang to escape from the cliff plateau and never come back to this cliff cave for the rest of his life. However, when he really broke out of the cave and walked back to the cliff cave, he suddenly found that his mood was so calm. The stone walls in the cave that made him extremely tired and depressed seemed to have a lot more natural beauty now, and the scene in front of him was completely different from the past. Only those who had experienced wind and rain could see the rainbow. Those who had experienced wind and rain suddenly looked up and saw the rainbow outside the cliff plateau, which must be the most beautiful. From the outside into the cliff cave, it was a bit dark. It was the first time for Ning Ke to walk into the cave from the outside in 3 months, so he was not used to it. He stretched out his right index finger. The extremely pure Great Spirit was slowly released from the water droplet in his abdomen. It passed through the passageway and entered the ocean of chi and mountain of snow. It flowed from the meridians to the fingers of his arm and then turned into a round white flame. Sang Sang looked at this scene in a daze, and subconsciously stretched out her slender finger to the side of Ning Ke's index finger. She slightly moved her mind, and then a white flame appeared. The 2 flames instantly lit up the cliff cave as if it were daytime. There was no difference between the 2 except that the flame between Sang Sang's fingers was unusually solemn and sacred. The 2 looked at the flame on each other's fingertips and smiled. Ning Ke asked, "This is Haotian's divine light?" Sang Sang nodded. Just like the theory in the Forbidden Book, most of the aura of heaven and earth in the world came from the sun in the sky. No matter how many different auras it became under the carving of time, it was the same thing in the origin. There was no essential difference between the Great Spirit and the divine light summoned by the divine skill. However, time was the greatest existence in the world after all. It was still unimaginable to erase its traces on the Great Spirit and eventually make the Great Spirit and Haotian divine light identical in substance and form. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 395. The old book in Ning Ke's hand was the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. Last autumn, the West Hill Divine Palace issued an order for the Central Plains countries to organize a coalition army to attack the Left Tent Palace. However, countless powerhouses secretly sneaked into the depths of the wilderness. It was because the front gate of the devil's doctrine was opened according to the time of heaven. The most important reason why those powerhouses entered the front gate of the devil's doctrine was this tomes of arcane. However, no one knew that this tomes of arcane, the only thing that Hautian Taoism lost and had not been seen for nearly 1,000 years, had been casually placed by eldest brother in the academy at his waist. Ning Ke had a conversation with eldest brother about this tomes of arcane beside the bonfire in the woods of the wilderness. He had even opened the cover of this tomes of arcane in accordance with the prophecy of the great divine priest of revelation of West Hill. However, at that time, he did not have the ability to look at the tomes of arcane. Ning Ke held the Ming hand scroll as if he was holding a thick stack of silver notes or second brother's high crown. He was so nervous that his arms trembled slightly. "Senior brother, I really don't dare to look at it." Eldest brother looked at him and said with a smile, "Since the headmaster asked me to send this book to you after you broke through, you should be able to understand some of it now. You should know that this is the most special of the 7 tomes of arcane. Try your best to understand as much as you can. I believe there will be some benefits." Ning Ke recalled the horrible pressure he felt when he opened the Piming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane in the wilderness. He said with a bitter smile, "I don't know if the benefits are worth the pain." Eldest brother said, "The historical origin of the revelation department of the Divine Hall comes from this book. Some important ideas of the Buddhism sect are also related to this book. The Devil's Doctrine is directly based on this tomes of arcane. This tomes of arcane has directly caused many changes in our world. Do you think it is worth it?" Ning Ke suddenly asked curiously, "Eldest brother, you have been carrying this tomes of arcane with you for a long time. What benefits did you get?" "The specific benefits are not necessarily benefits." Eldest brother answered honestly after a moment of hesitation, "And there are many parts of this tomes of arcane that I don't understand." Ning Ke thought of something and said, "Senior brother once said that if the 7 volumes of tomes of arcane were to be opened in the world, there would be signs for everyone to see. Senior brother can isolate the aura of the tomes of arcane, but I don't have that ability. Once I open the Ming hand scroll, wouldn't it be equivalent to telling others that the tomes of arcane is in the academy?" The eldest brother looked at the cliff cave. Ning Ke immediately understood. Walking into the cliff cave, Sang Sang had already cleaned the ground in advance. Ning Ke sat cross-legged and calmed his mind. Then, without hesitation, he reached out and slowly opened the cover page of the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane. When his fingers opened the cover, an extremely calm and tranquil aura emerged from the yellowish paper and began to spread throughout the cave. The aura of the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane did not belong to the mortal world. Naturally, it would drift towards the vault of heaven. If this aura was allowed to touch the vault of heaven, it would reveal a sign that could be seen by everyone in the mortal world in a peculiar way. From then on, it would announce its opening to the mortal world. Ning Ke did not know what method eldest brother used to hide the tranquil aura that could not be found in the human world when he read the tome of arcane. However, when he opened the tome of arcane today, he was not worried that the powerhouses in the world would discover the tome of arcane. This was because he was reading in the cliff cave, and the cliff cave was protected by the inhibition set by the headmaster. As expected, the tranquil aura emitted from the Ming hand scroll could not blend with the aura emitted by anything in the cliff cave. It floated out of the cave indifferently but determinedly. At the entrance of the cliff cave, the aura of the Ming hand scroll met the aura left by the headmaster. When the two auras met, there was no earth-shattering scene. There was not even a feeling of repulsion. They just stared at each other in silence and then gradually quieted down. In the context of some counties in the Tang Empire, the phrase, "reading the tome of arcane," was often used to describe the gap between the reader and the object of the reading. It was impossible for the reader to understand anything. After being imprisoned on the cliff for 3 months, Ning Kei's state had improved and his spirit and temperament had improved by leaps and bounds. However, there was still a huge gap between him and the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane that had become a legend. However, it was also because of the 3 months of hard cultivation and mental polishing that he managed to control the violent shaking of his sense of perception with great difficulty after opening the Ming hand scroll. Finally, he could truly look at the slightly yellowed paper. Today, he still could not truly understand the tomes of arcane. However, at least he could clearly see the handwriting on the page and remember some mysterious sentences. It was only because the tranquil aura of the tomes of arcane did not naturally blend with the human world that the sentences became more and more fragmented in his mind. After a while, Ning Kei reached out and closed the cover page of the Ming hand scroll without hesitation. At this moment, he had only read the first page of the tomes of arcane. As if worried that he could not resist the temptation of reading the tomes of arcane, he did not look at the cover page of the tomes of arcane again. He even closed his eyes tightly and frowned deeply. His sense of perception was already on the verge of breaking and could no longer withstand the indifferent gaze of the tranquil aura of the Ming hand scroll. Therefore, he had to leave this world that was far beyond his ability. The simple and unadorned handwriting on the first page of the tomes of arcane was still lingering in his mind. However, it had become extremely fragmented, like the broken stones that filled the sky after a landslide. It was impossible to see the original majestic scenery of the mountain. Reading the tomes of arcane was indeed reading the tomes of arcane. He could not understand it at all and could not even remember anything. Ning Kei felt a little regretful. However, after 3 months of seclusion in the cliff cave, the headmaster of academy had already taught him some things without showing up. That was the patience and courage that he had once thought of. Ning Kei was not willing to give up just like that. He closed his eyes tightly and frowned even more. He clenched his hands tightly on his knees and began to try to restore the fragmented handwriting of the tomes of arcane in his mind. This kind of attempt required thinking. However, once a human thought, the tomes of arcane seemed to start to sneer in the empty space, causing severe pain in his sense of perception. If it were someone else, they would definitely not be able to complete the reorganization of the handwriting of the tomes of arcane. However, Ning Kei had enough patience and courage. More importantly, when he first entered the academy 2 years ago, he never got tired of reading books in the old library. Even if he vomited blood and passed out, he did not give up. Later, he finally used the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to get close to those words that could only be understood by cultivators in the upper see-through state. He had an innate keen intuition for words and an indescribable ability. That was why Master Yen Sei believed that he had the potential to be a divine talisman master. These past and experiences, especially the pain and confusion when reading, now seemed to be some kind of preparation for him to read the tomes of arcane today. This was probably the so-called lucky chance. Moreover, this lucky chance was not arranged by Haotian or the headmaster of academy. It was obtained by himself through his own efforts. With the passage of time, the mysterious and broken sentences left in his spiritual world by the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane were gradually restored and reconstructed. It was like the gravel in the sky falling to the ground in an extremely precise order. Then, a new mountain was gradually formed. Ning Kei finally remembered a few words on the first page of the tomes of arcane. The first sentence at the beginning was, "The wise are the sun and the moon." The cycle of the sun and the moon, the fusion of light and darkness, is the law of nature. The law of nature is the Tao. Tao develops the law. When the law enters the end, the night comes and the moon appears. Ning Kei did not understand what these words in the tomes of arcane meant, but he felt an unprecedented chill and fear. Especially when he thought of a certain key point, he suddenly woke up. He looked up at the cliff cave and found it was already late at night. Then he realized that he had been thinking for a long time unconsciously. The tomes of arcane on his knees had disappeared, and eldest brother and Sang Sang were nowhere to be found. Above the cliff at night, the sky was full of stars, but there was no moon. Ning Ke had seen the moon. In this world, he missed the moon countless times, whether it was as round as a silver plate or as curved as a delicate eyebrow. However, he had never seen it again. So he was very sure that there was no moon in this world, and even people in this world did not know what the moon was. Then why was there a moon in the Ming hand scroll? The words on the first page of the tomes of arcane seemed to be some kind of prophecy. The more Ning Ke thought about it, the colder he felt. So after a while, he noticed the back of the tall figure at the edge of the cliff. The moment he saw the back of the tall figure, a warm current flowed into Ning Ke's body, turning all the confusion, fear and uneasiness into the fragrance of flowers and leaves in late spring. Ning Ke stood up and rubbed his numb knees. He walked out of the cliff cave and came to the edge of the cliff. He knelt behind the tall figure and kowtowed heavily. Now he had long understood the painstaking efforts of the headmaster to imprison him in the cliff cave. Hearing the sound of Ning Ke kowtowing, the headmaster did not turn back. He looked at the stars in the night sky, which were like jewels inlaid in black velvet, and suddenly asked, "How many sentences do you understand?" After a moment of silence, Ning Ke repeated the few sentences he remembered from the Ri hand scroll. The Bming character is the sun and the moon. The Bming hand scroll talks about the cycle of the sun and the moon. The cycle of the sun and the moon, the fusion of light and darkness. The headmaster frowned and said, "But what is the moon?" Ning Ke did not speak. The headmaster slowly turned around. His figure looked especially tall in the cliff shrouded in darkness. Ning Ke looked at his teacher and felt that he had seen him somewhere before. The headmaster looked at him and suddenly said, "On the balcony of the building of pines and cranes, you said that I was a pitiful old man." Ning Ke smiled awkwardly and wanted to explain. The headmaster did not let him explain. He continued, "Before you said that I was a pitiful old man, you once mocked me. At that time, you mocked me because I had never seen the moon. If that's the case, you must have seen the moon." The headmaster looked at the night sky full of stars. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Then, what is the moon?" Ning Ke did not know how to answer. He said bitterly, "Teacher, even you don't know what the moon is." "How would I know?" The headmaster looked away from the night sky and looked into his eyes. He said, "Because there is no omniscient person in the world, including me. But you are a person who was born with knowledge." Hearing this, Ning Ke immediately broke out in a cold sweat and wet the back of his clothes. "After a night of torment and a game of football, I am really tired. That's all for today. There are 2 days left. I will have a good sleep and try my best to solve it." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 396. The word moon had always existed in this world, such as the Yueluan kingdom, the famous laurel in the Yueluan kingdom, and the white color of the moon, which was derived from the color of the laurel petals. However, the word moon in this world had no specific meaning. It was as vague as light and muddy. Of course, the headmaster was not referring to the color of the moon, because he was asking about the moon. Because of this question, Ning Ke suddenly became nervous. According to his usual style, he would definitely try his best to play dumb at this moment. However, if he played dumb now, he would really be a fool. Because the headmaster had already pointed out that he was a person who was born with knowledge. Ning Ke lowered his head and felt the cold sweat flowing down his back, gradually wetting his clothes. After a long silence, he said in a trembling voice, "The sun and the moon rotate, and light and darkness are opposite. I think that the moon might be something that corresponds to the sun." The sun appears in the day, and the moon appears in the night. The headmaster said, "Be more specific." Ning Ke looked at the cliff in front of him, at the flowing clouds under the starlight, and fell into a long silence again. Then he said, "It might be a huge stone ball floating in the night sky. Because it can reflect the light of the sun, it appears very bright at night." He could not explain why he could describe the moon that did not exist in this world. The headmaster looked at him and smiled. He helped him to give an explanation that might not be reasonable, but at least it was reasonable. "It seems that what you saw in your dream was very interesting." Hearing the word dream, Ning Ke looked up at the headmaster who was standing by the cliff. He looked at the headmaster's clothes dancing in the night wind, and vaguely seemed to catch something. "This idea is indeed very interesting." The headmaster turned to look at the night sky and said admiringly, "The eternal night always needs some light. Everything in the world corresponds to each other. If the sun appears in the day, it is not bad to have a corresponding moon. But if there is a moon, where would it be? If the moon reflects the light of the sun as you said, doesn't that mean that the sun is also in our world at night, but we can't see it? Then where is the sun at night? Is it really like when the west moves and the mountains set, falling below our feet, and then rising again in the morning? Doesn't that mean the sun is revolving around our world? But the world we live in is a flat and open land, and the edge is an endless abyss. Why did I wait for more than 10 days, but I didn't see the sun set into the abyss, and it just disappeared so suddenly?" The headmaster looked at the night sky with his hands behind his back and murmured to himself. He was not talking to Ning Ke, but to himself, who had been searching for the answer for countless years. After a while, he looked at Chang'an city in the distant wilderness and said with a frown, "There are still many places that are impassable. If this world were a ball, it would be connected." People in the secular world were used to the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. They were used to being shrouded in the radiance of Haotian day after day, just like they were used to the breakfast stalls on the street and the moss on the edge of the well. They never had any questions about these things, let alone wondered why these things existed. But the headmaster was not a person of the secular world. He needed to think. Few people in the world could understand what he was mumbling to himself. Those who heard it would even think that the headmaster was a crazy old man. Ning Ke understood some of it. He was a little confused, but then he admired the headmaster. The headmaster obviously had no knowledge of astronomy. He was about to touch the truth of the world just by following Ning Ke's simple explanation. However, the truth did not belong to this world, but another world. He did not know that the other world existed in the distant past, but in the future. "I have looked at this night sky for many years." The headmaster pointed at the high and dark sky above the cliff and the stars hanging in the sky. He said, "Whether it was many years ago or many years later, the stars have always stayed in their original positions and have not changed at all. This means that the relative positions of the earth and the sky are fixed. This stability is filled with a classical and solemn eternal beauty. But it is a little boring after looking at it for a long time." Ning Ke looked at the night sky along his teacher's arm. He did not know what the headmaster was trying to say. But since the beginning of the Tianqi era, the stars in the night sky have been getting dimmer day by day. Mortals can't see the difference, but I know they are getting dimmer. The headmaster said, "There was one time when the darkening process was seen by the officials of the imperial astronomer. That was why there was the comment, 'The stars are covered by the night sky, and the country will not be peaceful.'" Ning Ke knew that it was this comment from the imperial astronomer that caused the Tang Empire to fall into a dispute. It indirectly caused Li Yu to marry into the grassland a few years later. However, he only knew that the comment was true after hearing the headmaster's words today. At least the first half of the sentence was true. It turned out that the stars in the night sky were really getting dimmer. How could it be a matter of the country not being peaceful? The headmaster laughed. Ning Kei's mood was slightly relaxed. He did not expect the headmaster to continue. If the whole world has entered the eternal night, how could the Tang Empire not be the only country that is not peaceful? Thinking of the sentences in the Ming hand scroll that were similar to prophecy and some legends, Ning Kei could not control the nervousness and fear in his heart. He asked, "Teacher, is there really an underworld invasion?" The headmaster said, "The Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane foretold the arrival of the night. There are also related legends in the West Hill teachings and the ancient volumes of the Buddhism sect. Because of these prophecies and legends, many wise men have thought about it for countless years. 1,000 years ago, the divine priest of light went to the wilderness to preach, but he founded the devil's doctrine. The Buddhism sect's temples stayed in the deep mountains and did not move. It is probably related to this. As for whether the legends are true or not, no one knows." Ning Kei asked, "Teacher, you don't know either?" "I have said that there is no omniscient person in the world. Even those who are born with knowledge can only know the things that they have seen in their dreams. If they have not seen it, they still don't know." Ning Kei did not speak. The headmaster looked at the night sky above his head. After a moment of silence, he said, "In the past 2 years, your eldest brother and I have traveled in the world. We went to the cold region of the far north and found that the night there has obviously become much longer. The hot sea has even gradually become cold. That is why the desolate was forced to break the promise of 1,000 years and take the risk to return to the south." Ning Kei had heard of the legend of the underworld. Most people in the market knew about this legend. However, a legend was a legend after all. In addition, the West Hill Divine Palace had always been indifferent to this kind of legend, so the legend became increasingly illusory. However, the headmaster himself was a legendary figure. When the legend of the underworld came out of his solemn mouth, and there seemed to be some vague evidence, then the legend was probably true. Ning Kei felt cold, and the back of his wet clothes seemed to be frozen. No one noticed that even the winter in Chang'an last year was colder than the year before. Of course, this may be an accident. Until now, I still think that the underworld invasion is only a story used to scare children. Because no one has discovered the underworld, including me." The headmaster looked at Ning Kei's slightly pale face and comforted him, "And even if the eternal night comes, according to the records in the Ming hand scroll and the ancient Buddhism sect volumes, it can't be a very short process. It must be extremely long. Maybe 100 years, 1,000 years, or even 10,000 years. What does it have to do with people like us?" Ning Kei said sadly, "Headmaster is lying again. If you really don't believe in the story of the underworld invasion, why would you look for the underworld everywhere? And why would it take 10,000 years? Then tell me, where is the underworld?" The headmaster looked at Ning Kei with a smile. His smile seemed to hide an incomparably rich meaning. He asked, "Or, in your dreams, which direction is the underworld in the world?" Ning Kei felt the headmaster's gaze and thought of the bizarre story of his own life by the great divine priest of light. The cold sweat on his clothes instantly disappeared without a trace. Was he really the son of Yama? Did the headmaster already know that he was the son of Yama? Ning Kei couldn't accept this because he didn't know what Yama was, and he clearly knew where he came from. If this was true and he was really the legendary son of Yama, then the bloody storm that the West Hill Divine Palace set off in Chang'an back then seemed to have some kind of reason. And he hated this kind of reason, even if it was unreasonable. Looking at his anxious expression, the headmaster smiled and said, "When people think, Haotian always laughs. If the underworld really exists and will invade the human world, that is something that the supreme way of heaven needs to consider and is qualified to consider. As a child, what can you do? What can you change? If you can't do anything, then what's the point of you being so painful and anxious?" Ning Kei didn't agree with the headmaster's attitude. Thinking of the scene of eldest brother understanding the Tao in the morning and entering the Tao in the evening, he thought that it was okay for him to understand the Tao in the morning and die in the evening. Even if he couldn't change the final ending of the world and might not even see it, he could live happily with Sang Sang in the human world until his hair turned white. But anyone who could think would always want to know what was the end of time and why all this happened. However, since the headmaster didn't want to discuss this matter anymore, especially with him, no matter how he asked, he wouldn't say a word. Ning Ke lowered his head and kept silent for a long time. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at the headmaster. He asked seriously, "Then teacher, please tell me how youngest uncle died." Then he added, "This matter is meaningful to me." He knew that this matter was indeed meaningful to Ning Ke because he was now walking on the path that youngest uncle had walked, and he wanted to change the ending of this story. This is the first chapter. The second chapter will come out before 11:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 397. The headmaster asked, "Have you ever thought about what kind of existence Heaven's Way is?" Ning Ke thought for a while. He really had no concept of the heavenly way, which was an illusory existence. No. Didn't you just say that Haotian is always laughing when people are thinking? But sometimes, even if we are ridiculed, we still have to think. If a baby falls down on his first step and is ridiculed by others, then he will never try again, then he will never be able to walk again. If you learn calligraphy and the first character you write is too ugly, then you will never become the current Honorable Ning. Teacher, I think you are making fun of me now. Ning Ke said with a smile. He thought of how he had been searching for a way to cultivate for many years. He was also laughed at by people in the city of Wei when he was reading the article on the response of the Tao. But he did not give up and finally got to where he was today. Then he thought of his and Sang Sang's miserable life and confirmed that his view was correct. Then heaven definitely did not have a pair of eyes that always looked down on the joys and sorrows of the human world, because fate was not fair to people. So he answered after thinking for a while, Heaven's Way is a very empty existence. The headmaster was satisfied with his answer and said, "We don't know whether Haotian is alive or not. We don't know whether he has a specific form or not. We still don't know where Haotian is. But younger brother confirmed whether he has consciousness or not at the cost of his death." The chilly night wind rolled up the drifting clouds at the foot of the cliff, carrying with it the damp and cold water vapor. The clouds crashed into the precipice and then dispersed in all directions, gradually spreading to the cliff plateau, adding a bit of coolness to the atmosphere. The headmaster looked up at the high and cold sky and said slowly, "If Heaven's Way really exists and it looks down on the world, those people who are struggling to survive on the earth and even those cultivators who seem to be able to summon wind and rain are just like ants. If the heavenly axiom does exist, it won't show the slightest mercy or attention to ants at all. When some of the ants suddenly raise their heads to look at it and even begin to grow wings that are as thin as feathers and fly to the sky, trying to challenge it, how can its consciousness and will allow that to happen? If Heaven's Way really exists, it will be invisible and even more ruthless." Ning Ke looked at his teacher, who was standing on the edge of the cliff like an immortal in the night wind. He thought about the 3 consecutive sentences of, "If there really is Heaven's Way." After a long silence, he suddenly said firmly, "But teacher, you are not an ant." The headmaster laughed loudly. His laughter was full of grandeur. The laughter suddenly rose from the edge of the cliff and pierced the high and cold night sky. The sea of clouds between the cliffs was terrified and turbulent. It was not until the laughter of the headmaster gradually faded away that the clouds returned to calmness. The headmaster stood at the edge of the cliff and looked at the stars and clouds. After a long silence, he suddenly sighed and said, "It's a pity that there are no bugs." The Korean tiger chicken was the simplest form of drinking, but Ning Kei knew that the headmaster did not say it because he wanted to drink. He thought that this simple or even superficial description must be the headmaster's understanding of Haotian in this life. However, he could not understand the deep meaning of the phrase. The headmaster's previous words solved some of the doubts in his heart, but also gave birth to some new doubts. If youngest uncle was the ant that grew wings and wanted to fly to the sky, he would be punished by heaven because he offended the dignity of heaven's way. Then why did he do that? There were billions of ants in the world, and there must have been more than one that raised its head and looked at the sky. In the long years, there must have been many people that tried to fly to the clear blue sky. Where did those people go? Did they die heroically like youngest uncle, or did they return to the embrace of Haotian and enter the perfect eternity like the stories of immortalization recorded in the West Hill scriptures? If youngest uncle's state did not allow him to stay in the world, then why did he choose to challenge heaven's way instead of entering eternity? Was it just because of pride? But no matter how fierce and proud a tiger was, it would not roar at a hunter's whistle for no reason. There was another question. Why did the headmaster still stay in the world? Where did the headmaster keep his wings? Did the headmaster not want to see the true appearance of heaven's way? He looked at the headmaster at the edge of the cliff and said, "Teacher, there are still many things that I don't understand." The headmaster said, "When you fully understand the third book, you will probably understand." Ning Kei knew that it was not something that could be done in a short period of time. After a moment of silence, he got rid of the atmosphere of this mysterious conversation and returned to the real world. He sincerely asked, "The Great Spirit in my body can disguise as the aura of heaven and earth, but it is not easy to cover up my body. If I let someone's weapon fall on my body, Haotian Taoism will definitely find out that something is wrong." The headmaster said, "Didn't you ask someone to spread the word that you are cultivating in both talisman and martial arts?" Ning Kei smiled awkwardly and said, "How can I deceive people in the cultivation of martial arts?" The headmaster said mockingly, "In cultivation, as long as you can beat people, you can naturally deceive them. Don't let people hurt your body. Who will know about the strangeness of your body?" Ning Kei was silent. He thought that the battle between cultivators was unpredictable and dangerous. Even if he had improved a lot, how could he ensure that his opponent's natal sword would not touch his body? Even Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, would not dare to boast like that. The headmaster looked into his eyes and said after a moment of silence, "After younger brother left this cliff cave, he did not let anyone touch his body until the day he died." The headmaster left the cliff plateau. In the rest of the night, Ning Kei had been sitting between the cliffs, thinking and analyzing what the headmaster had said. He also carefully sorted out the 3 months he was imprisoned in the cliff cave and turned what he had gained in the state and will into the actual existence in his body. At dawn, Sang Sang came back to the cliff platform. She helped him wash up, packed all the luggage, and walked down the mountain along the narrow stone path. The cliffs were still beautiful, the stone path was steep, and the waterfall poured into the sea of clouds. After walking along the canyon for a few steps, he saw Chen Pippi's figure. Then the senior brothers and senior sisters. The disciples of the second floor of the academy were all here to welcome youngest brother. Tang Xiaotang skipped over and untied some luggage from Sang Sang. She glared at Ning Kei and then took Sang Sang's little hand and walked to the front. The eldest brother looked at Ning Kei and smiled gently, saying, "You have worked hard these days." Ning Kei bowed to the senior brothers and senior sisters and said, "Senior brothers and senior sisters, you have worked hard." The crowd happily surrounded him and congratulated him. The 11th brother gave him a bunch of wildflowers, but Sang Sang was not happy. The 9th brother and the 9th brother began to play the zither and flute proudly. The 5th brother and the 8th brother found that they could not do anything. They could not drag Ning Kei to play chess at this time, so they could only keep congratulating him, like a boring cycle of 4 tribulations. The 6th brother patted his shoulder to comfort him. His hands, which were used to forging iron, almost made him spit blood. The seventh sister went forward and lovingly pinched his face, almost making him bleed. The second brother stood in the distance and looked a little pale. Looking at Ning Kei's nervous eyes, he nodded and even squeezed out a very rare smile. Today, the back of the mountain of the academy was full of laughter and laughter. In the big thatched hut with ventilation, the aroma of food filled the air. The seventh sister and Tang Xiaotang cooked a sumptuous banquet. The banquet was to welcome the youngest brother, Ning Kei, who had successfully broken through and did not have to be imprisoned in the cliff cave to die miserably. It was also to welcome the return of the headmaster after traveling around the world. Although the welcome time was 3 months late, the most important reason was that this was Ning Kei's apprenticeship ceremony. He would officially become the headmaster's disciple. Ning Kei knelt in front of the headmaster's chair and kowtowed 3 times respectfully and honestly. Unfortunately, his body was too strong after cultivating the Great Spirit. The 3 kowtows caused cracks to appear on the black bricks in front of him, but his forehead still did not bleed or even bruise. There was only some dust on it. He felt very sorry that he could not take the opportunity to show his sincerity to the headmaster and flatter him. Standing up and taking a cup of warm tea from the third sister, Ning Kei walked to the headmaster and offered it with both hands. The headmaster took it and slowly took a sip. The apprenticeship ceremony was officially completed, and it seemed very simple. The seventh sister walked over with a pile of clothes and asked, "Youngest brother, choose a color." Ning Kei was slightly startled. He looked at his senior sister's arms and found that she was holding the academy uniforms. It was spring, so it was only natural to wear spring clothes. Compared to the uniforms of the front yard, there was no obvious difference between the uniforms of the students of the second floor and the academy uniforms of the front yard. The only difference was that there were more colors. He looked at the senior brothers and sisters around the thatched hut and noticed that everyone's choice seemed to be very random. The third sister was still wearing the loose light blue academy uniform, the eldest brother was wearing an old coat and did not wear the academy uniform at all, and the rest of the academy uniforms were of different colors, including red and gray. The seventh sister looked at his hesitant expression and joked, "You really have to be careful. You can't change it after you choose." Ning Kei subconsciously looked at Sang Sang. Since they left Min Mountain and entered the city of Wei, it had always been Sang Sang who decided what they wore. Sang Sang nodded. Ning Kei understood her meaning and said, "Senior sister, I want the black one." The seventh sister smiled and said, "You are the first one to choose the black one in the back of the mountain. Youngest brother really has a good taste. A man must be handsome and dressed in soaps. This is the truth, but some stupid people never understand." The second brother standing behind the headmaster was inexplicably serious. The eldest brother looked at Ning Kei who was putting on the black academy uniform and could not help but sigh softly. The headmaster gently stroked his beard and looked at Ning Kei, asking, "Why did you choose the black one?" With the help of Sang Sang, Ning Kei buttoned the slanted cloth and answered honestly, "Black is to prevent dirt." This was the real answer. He and Sang Sang did not think that a man must be handsome and dressed in soaps. They were more concerned about how to wash less and save water and soap. The eldest brother was stunned. The headmaster's fingers slightly froze and he smiled and shook his head. This is the second chapter. Try to finish the third chapter before 1 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 398. After the banquet, second brother walked to Ning Kei and said, "The sword master from South Jin Kingdom is still waiting for you outside the academy. Since this matter has been settled, when will you go out?" Ning Kei smiled and said, "Anyway, no one knows that I came out from the cliff cave. What's the hurry? Let him continue to wait. I'll rest for 2 days first. His words were a little shameless, but second brother was not angry. He just looked at him and said coldly, I have already told the instructor of the front yard that you have broken through. So don't think about delaying it. Hurry up and settle this matter. Otherwise, it will be inappropriate to let Lu Bai's brother sit at the academy's gate. Ning Ke thought that it was not easy for him to escape from the cliff cave that was isolated from the rest of the world. He just had a meal and did not even take a bath. Now he was going to fight with someone else. How could he be a senior brother? He was furious, but he did not show any anger on his face. He looked at second brother and said with grievance, got it. I'll go and meet that guy right now. After second brother left, Chen Pipi came over and said worriedly, what should we do? During the days when you were imprisoned in the cliff cave, that guy surnamed Lu has been waiting outside the academy. It seems that he did not wait in vain. His state seems to have improved. I don't think you can beat him. Never mind. I'll take a rest first. Ning Ke looked at second brother's back disappearing into the forest. He looked extremely presumptuous, but his voice was very low. He said, now that the headmaster is back, do you think I'll be afraid of you? Chen Pipi smiled and said, that's right. Now that second brother still wants to discipline us as strictly as before, we can complain to the headmaster. You don't know that the headmaster doesn't like to care about these trivial things. He usually keeps silent and pretends to be stupid. Then we can pretend that the headmaster has spoken to deceive eldest brother and use eldest brother to suppress second brother. Except for your marriage, second brother has never dared to disobey eldest brother. These words were a little confusing. After a moment of silence, Ning Ke looked at him and said with emotion, I didn't expect that your shamelessness is somewhat like mine. Chen Pipi was about to retort, but he suddenly put away the frivolous expression on his face and put his hands behind his back. He looked at Ning Ke and said calmly, you are my younger brother. I will not argue with you. Ning Ke was slightly surprised. When he heard the footsteps behind him and saw Tang Xiaotong's figure from the corner of his eye, he immediately understood. He looked at Chen Pipi mockingly and said, good for you. Chen Pipi didn't dare to look him in the eye and walked towards Tang Xiaotang. Tang Xiaotang ignored him and walked directly to Ning Quebec. She said in a clear voice, Ning. As soon as the word left her mouth, the little girl thought of something and timidly shut her mouth. She looked around and realized that her teacher, Yu Lian, was not around. She patted her chest with lingering fear and stuck out her tongue cutely. She continued, youngest martial uncle, I want to take Sang Sang out to play. In the early morning, a gentle spring rain fell on the back of the mountain of the academy. Tang Xiaotang was going to take Sang Sang into the mountain to pick those newborn mushrooms. Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang and thought that the little girl had been suffering in the cliff cave with him for the past 3 months. Although she could occasionally go down the mountain for a walk, she must have had a hard time. He rubbed her head and said, go ahead. Looking at the 2 girls walking up the mountain hand in hand, Chen Pipi returned to Ning Ke's side and imagined their future life. He sighed and said, they have become good friends in advance. Shouldn't we strengthen our communication so that we won't be punished too badly after we get married? Good for you. Ning Ke looked at him and said disdainfully, I have always been in charge of my family. When you can let Tang Xiaotang fetch water for your feet, then you are qualified to discuss these issues with me. After saying this, he turned around and walked towards the direction of Mirror Lake. Chen Pipi shouted behind him, what are you going to do? Be careful not to touch second brother. Ning Ke was furious. He thought that Chen Pipi deliberately shouted so loudly because he wanted second brother to hear it. He turned around and shouted at Chen Pipi, who was 3 steps away, as if he was talking to a farmer on the opposite cliff. His loud voice kept echoing in the back of the mountain of the academy. I'll go to check the goods. Don't worry. I won't tell Tang Xiaotang about that. Do you hear me? Chen Pipi heard it and felt painful. He thought that second brother, third sister and even Tang Xiaotang might have heard Ning Kei's shameless framing. He wanted to find a rabbit hole in the grass and crawl into it. It was a very ordinary-looking padao. The dark, slender blade looked like the cornices of a palace under the night sky. The lines were slightly curved and smooth, and the sharp edge glinted with a cold light. The long hilt was designed to be held with 2 hands, and a fine velvet rope was tied around it. From its appearance, it looked like any one of the 3 padaos. But when Ning Kei held the padao, he knew that it was a brand new blade. This was because a completely different feeling came from his palm. This slender and long padao was unimaginably heavy, completely inconsistent with the size and length of the padao in his eyes. For such a thin and long blade to have such weight, one could imagine how dense it was. Naturally, one could also guess how tough it was. You said to combine the 3 padaos into one, so I refined all 3 padaos into this one. Sixth brother looked at the padao in Ning Kei's hands like looking at a child and said honestly, I thought it would be easy, but I didn't expect it to be so difficult. The melting of ink was smooth, but the tempering part was troublesome. To combine the 3 padaos into one meant that 3 times the amount of metal had to be melted into the same volume. Ning Kei thought that if it was not tempered, how could it be done? He couldn't help but feel grateful to sixth brother. Sixth brother handed over a scabbard made of unknown leather and said, the talisman lines on the padao are the ones you designed. But fourth brother said that it's better for you to carve them yourself. Ning Kei sincerely thanked sixth brother and was ready to carve the talisman. With the experience of making primordial 13 arrows, this was not too difficult for him. However, he seemed to think of something. After a moment of silence, he put the heavy padao back into the scabbard and looked at the puzzled sixth brother. He said, let's talk about it later. Of course, you should decide your own weapon. Sixth brother said, youngest brother, I just want to ask you one thing. I'm really satisfied with this padao. If you want to give it a name, you must think of a good one. Ning Kei's body was slightly stiff. He thought of the experience when they developed talisman arrows together last time. He thought of the extremely unreliable names such as Silver Arrow, Cloud-Piercing Arrow and Primordial 13 Arrows. He immediately understood sixth brother's worries and said firmly, Senior brother, rest assured. I will ask the teacher to give it a name. Sixth brother hesitated for a moment and said, youngest brother, actually, the teacher's name is not very reliable. The two of them stared at each other and finally decided to temporarily put aside the matter of naming the new padao. Opening the box, Ning Kei looked at another thing that he had asked sixth brother to make and said happily, I didn't expect it to be so smooth. Senior brother, what material did you use? The craftsmanship of this gadget is not difficult. Sixth brother said, I asked the Ministry of Works to find some black crystals and then made some frames. I also made an extra one. There are 3 sets here. Ning Kei thought that the more the better. Suddenly, he thought of another thing and looked around to make sure that Sang Sang was not nearby. He came to sixth brother and whispered for a long time. Sixth brother frowned slightly and asked confusedly, it's easy to find transparent crystals. It's not difficult even if it has no impurities. If it is to prevent dust, why must it have such a small arc? The requirements for grinding and carving are too high. Even if we use water to grind it, it can't be guaranteed. Ning Kei hesitated for a moment and said, I have a friend who has poor eyesight and always sees things a little blurry. If she wears this thing, it can improve her eyesight. Sixth brother was slightly surprised and thought that youngest brother was really talented and had so many wonderful ideas and wisdom in his mind. He could even cure eyesight? Just when he was about to get to the bottom of it and figure out why the curved transparent crystal could help people with impaired vision, the heavy leather curtain was lifted and the fourth brother walked in. Looking at the knife on Ning Kei's back, fourth brother asked, "Have you finished carving the talisman?" Sixth brother shook his head. Ning Kei explained, "I have something to do later. I will carve it later." Fourth brother slightly frowned and said, "So you know you have something to do?" Second brother asked you to solve the problem quickly. Why are you still here? Although those onlookers can't enter the back mountain, I feel uncomfortable when I think of the crowd outside the academy's gate. Ning Kei thought faintly. Just because he felt uncomfortable, he wanted to drive his youngest brother out of the academy to fight. As his senior brothers, they naturally thought that the young powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom was just an insignificant piece of trash. But that person was the younger brother of the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai. Your youngest brother might not be able to defeat him. He looked at fourth brother who was walking towards the sand table and tentatively asked, "Senior brother, where is second brother?" Fourth brother impatiently waved his hand and signaled him to hurry to the academy's side gate to finish the matter. He said, "Second brother went fishing with the headmaster at the West Pond." Fishing at the West Pond, not only could he enjoy the scenery and the fun of fishing, but he could also accompany the headmaster and flatter him. It was really a happy thing. But he had to go to the academy's side gate to fight and struggle like a fish on a hook? The more Ning Kei thought about it, the more he felt it was unfair. He did not want to leave the back mountain at all. However, he was worried that if he stayed in the back mountain, he would be seen by second brother. That was more dangerous than fighting with the Sage of Swords' younger brother. Suddenly, he realized that the most dangerous place was also the safest place, so he followed the sound of the waterfall and quietly walked to the courtyard of second brother. He climbed the low courtyard wall with both hands and looked into the courtyard. After confirming that the scary big white goose was not there, he immediately felt relieved. Ning Kei casually pushed the door open and walked in. He looked at the young and cute little boy in the room and said proudly, "I want to take a bath and sleep. Do you have hot water?" The little boy opened his eyes wide and looked at him innocently. Everyone in the academy knew that a young powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom had challenged Ning Kei to a duel. And that person had been sitting on the futon outside the academy's side gate and waiting for Ning Kei for 3 months. In those 3 months, the powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom had been exposed to the wind and the sun, drenched in rain and covered in dust. His life could be said to be difficult, even more so than Ning Kei, who was in seclusion in the cliff cave. Ning Kei knew the current situation, but he did not immediately accept the challenge after coming out of seclusion. Instead, he had the leisure to take a bath and sleep. This is the 3rd chapter. Try to finish the 4th chapter before 3 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 399. Looking at the unreasonable Ning Kei, who was about to take a bath and sleep, the little boy was stunned. After a long while, he came to his senses and asked in a trembling voice, "Young master, what are you going to do?" Ning Kei smiled and said, "I'm going to eat you alive. Hurry up and pour me a bowl of soy sauce and some horseradish." The little boy was shocked and embarrassed. He said shyly, "Young master, I'm not tasty. Young master often says that I don't like to wash my feet and I smell." Ning Kei was startled and laughed. He said, Okay, I'll wash myself and eat myself." The little boy was really a well-behaved child. He didn't know how to refuse Ning Kei's ridiculous request and went to the kitchen to boil a big pot of hot water. In the steam, Ning Kei lay in the big wooden tub contentedly and looked at the little boy who was busy looking for a towel. He asked, "Speaking of which, I still don't know your name." The little boy put the towel in the hole of the tub and answered softly, "I'm Su Jialuan." "That's a good name, but it sounds too elegant." I have to change it. Ning Ke waved his hand and said, your voice is always so soft. I'll call you Matzi from now on. It sounds cute. The little boy smiled and went to get another tub of hot water. Then he said seriously, Little Wenzi is a good name. But the name Su Jiaoluan was given by young master. Should I go and ask him now? Ning Ke was shocked and his head sank into the water. He almost choked and said, don't tell him. You know your young master's temper. After taking a bath, Ning Ke really had a good sleep in second brother's courtyard. When he woke up, the sun had already passed the middle of the sky and was slowly moving to the west, shining on the courtyard. After changing into a brand new black academy uniform, Ning Ke asked the little boy to help him comb his hair. He looked at himself in the bronze mirror and was very satisfied. He thought that anyone could comb his hair better than Sang Sang. After thanking the little boy, Ning Ke left the small courtyard. Although he really did not want to fight with Sword Saint Liu Bai's younger brother, he knew that Liu Bai would wait outside the academy for 3 months and would definitely not leave midway. He could not hide in the academy for the rest of his life. Eventually, he would have to fight with Liu Bai. It was better to fight sooner rather than later. Because he had been in seclusion in the cliff cave for 3 months, he could smell the spring breeze and see the wildflowers when he broke out of the cave. At this moment, both his physical and mental state were at their most perfect state. It was even vaguely similar to the feeling he had after breaking the realm by the Daming Lake in the wilderness. The duel between the brother of Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword of South Jin Kingdom, and Ning Ke, Mr. 13 of the Academy, was much more sensational than the duel between Ning Ke and Monk Guanhai. It attracted the attention of all the cultivators in the world and even many common people. Although the senior brothers at the back of the mountain of the academy were anxious for Ning Ke to settle this matter, they had no interest in the matter itself. They were all obsessed and had long surpassed the obsession of winning or losing. They did not care at all whether Ning Ke could defeat that young powerhouse. As for the possibility that Ning Ke might be injured or even killed, in this world, there was no one who dared to kill the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy at the gate of the academy. Not to mention that the young powerhouse from South Jin Kingdom was the brother of Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword. Even the most powerful Sage of Sword, Liu Bai himself would not dare to do such a thing. Because the headmaster of the academy was there. Therefore, when Ning Ke finished his bath and meditation, put on his black academy uniform and floated to the front yard in the spring breeze, no one came to see him off. Of course, Sang Sang would follow him. Tang Xiaotang followed Sang Sang. Chen Pipi followed Tang Xiaotang. When they walked to the meadow at the edge of the cliff platform at the back of the mountain, Ning Ke suddenly stopped and looked at the stream below the meadow. Second brother's big white goose was by the stream at this time. Today it did not feed the fish. Instead, it held its head high and walked proudly in the meadow. The big black horse followed behind the big white goose dejectedly, not daring to fall behind or take a step forward. The little snow wolf cowered behind the big black horse, carefully keeping pace with the two fellows in front. The big white goose walked very seriously. When it reached the end of the meadow, it turned back again. It walked in a straight line without any deviation. When it turned back, it saw the big black horse dejectedly and angrily barked twice, its voice very strict. The big black horse suddenly seemed to see Ning Quebec. It hurriedly raised its head in fear and pretended to be arrogant and elegant. It also wanted to please the big white goose, so it grinned and looked very funny. The four people standing on the meadow stared at this scene in a daze. Tang Xiaotang glanced at Ning Ke and said mockingly, "Youngest uncle's horse is really similar to your temperament. It is as timid as a mouse and flatters others." Ning Ke looked at the black horse's appearance and felt extremely embarrassed. Now that Tang Xiaotang said it, he became even more embarrassed and said, "The little snow wolf raised by youngest nephew is quite spirited, but why is its tail always drooping?" Tang Xiaotang sneered and said, "It's better than someone who let his opponent wait in the sun outside the academy while he secretly bathed and slept. Youngest uncle is really insidious." Ning Ke said, "You flatter me." Chen Pipi wanted to explain for Ning Ke, but when he looked at Tang Xiaotang's clear eyes, he somehow felt guilty and said, "Yes, younger brother's action is a little too insidious." Sang Sang looked at the meadow and said, "That big white goose is really arrogant. It looks like it is training the army. In that case, isn't it the general in the back of the mountain? It's useless no matter how proud the general is, because he has to train the army for His Majesty to see." Ning Ke looked at the old yellow cow who was resting in the grass by the stream with its eyes closed and its front knees bent. As expected, the big white goose led the big black horse and the little snow wolf forward 4 times and came to a place not far from the old yellow cow. It respectfully lowered its proud head. The old yellow cow slowly opened its eyes and looked at it. It gently shook its head up and down and then seemed to feel that this matter was too boring. It turned around and chewed on some grass before continuing to rest. Ning Ke looked at the old yellow cow that chewed the grass into foam but did not swallow it. Instead, it spat it out in disgust. He looked at the 3 fellows standing behind it and pondered. This was the magical back of the mountain of the academy. If the beasts in the back of the mountain were so arrogant, then as a person from the back of the mountain, he should be even more arrogant. Then, he would go and prove his arrogance. The side door of the academy was very remote and usually quiet. Other than the people from the back of the mountain who would occasionally come and go from here, few people would come here. However, after the powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom, Luiqing, submitted a letter of challenge to the academy and sat down on the futon outside the side door, the area around the side door suddenly became lively. The students from the front yard of the academy and the citizens of Chang'an came to watch the show, as if they wanted to turn this place into a scenic spot. Especially today, there were more than 1,000 people gathered outside the side door. If not for the imperial court's quick response and the Yulin royal guards to maintain order, the quiet grass would have been trampled by the excited crowd. It was rare for ordinary people to see cultivators, let alone cultivators fighting. Chang'an was full of powerhouses, so the people in the city were more knowledgeable in this aspect. However, it was still extremely rare for them to have a chance to see it up close. The news of someone challenging the academy had been spread for 3 months. Everyone knew the location of the duel. Even many citizens of Chang'an had come to see the person from the South Jin Kingdom sitting at the door of the academy. Today, when the news of Mr. 13 of the academy breaking out of the cave spread to Chang'an, countless people came to watch the show. There was no doubt that it was a big show. There was a bluestone road on a hill not far away. Dozens of horse carriages were parked on the side of the road. It seemed that some young ladies from mansions in Chang'an could not resist the temptation of the liveliness and came here. Among the dozens of carriages, most of them were naturally the nobles. They couldn't push forward with all their might like the common people, and they couldn't disregard their status and take the risk to climb the poplar tree. Moreover, they climbed higher and higher just to find the best vantage point. These nobles included the relevant officials of the Tang Empire and a few generals from the military. Naturally, there were also cultivators from various sects who came after hearing the news. The envoy from the South Jin Kingdom and a few disciples from the Sword Garret stood silently beside their horse carriages. The officials from the Imperial Center Administration of the Tang Empire smiled and stood not far from them. He Mingqi, the Taoist from the South Gate Temple of Haotian, held the yellow oiled paper umbrella under his armpit and stood quietly beside a horse carriage. The horse carriage was black and embroidered with complicated golden patterns. It looked majestic and beautiful, but there was no one around the horse carriage on such a crowded road. That was the respect that everyone showed to the horse carriage. The horse carriage belonged to the West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps. The great divine priest of revelation was not in the carriage. The duel between a student from the second floor of the academy and Liu Bai's brother was far from enough for this bigwig to deign to appear. In the carriage sat a man with a snow-white beard and a very young appearance. He was Cheng Lixue, the priest of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace. Cheng Lixue's position in the Divine Hall was even higher than that of Prince Longqing. He could sit side by side with the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, before she went to the wilderness. He was also an important bigwig. Cheng Lixue gently lifted the curtains and looked at He Mingqi, who was standing quietly by the window. After a slight hesitation, he smiled and said, "Senior brother He, why don't you come up and sit?" He Mingqi smiled and said, "I'm used to standing." After a moment of silence, Cheng Lixue looked at the side door of the academy at the bottom of the hill. He looked at Liu Bai, who was sitting on the futon. He found that under the gaze of countless people and surrounded by countless discussions, this young powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom still maintained a clear mind. It had been half a day since the news that Ning Ke had broken out of seclusion and was going to attend the duel had spread. The person who should have appeared long ago had not yet appeared. The surrounding people of Chang'an City were already bored to death, and some had even left. However, Liu Bai's face did not show any signs of anxiety. His posture and even his clothes did not change, which was very frightening. Cheng Lixue looked at him and was slightly moved. He suddenly asked, "Senior brother He, do you think Ning Ke will come out?" He Mingqi smiled and said, "Ning Ke is the most unlike the headmaster's disciple, so I can't say for sure." Cheng Lixue thought of their encounter in the palace of the wilderness and could not help but laugh. He said, "He is indeed a very interesting person, but I think he will arrive soon." Not that he was about to arrive, but that he had already arrived. The side door of the academy was slowly pushed open from the inside. A black figure appeared in front of everyone. Everyone cheered. This is the 4th chapter. I will try to finish the 5th chapter before 4:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 400. Ning Ke's well-tailored black academy uniform swayed gently in the warm spring breeze. His black hair was tightly tied up and then tied into a very simple and capable bun. His cheeks were slightly thinner and he looked more handsome than before. This was the image that Ning Ke had when he appeared in front of everyone, looking particularly refreshed. There were many students from the front yard of the academy watching the battle. Chu Yuxian and the others were quite familiar with Ning Ke, so they couldn't help cheering loudly when they saw Ning Quebec infected by the atmosphere of the academy students. The crowd became more excited, and some even started whistling. Zhong Dajuan stood in the crowd and looked at the young man in black on the stone steps in the distance. He thought of the scenes when he first entered the academy 2 years ago. A trace of hatred and jealousy flashed in his eyes, and then all those emotions turned into frustration and loneliness. Now he and Ning Ke were in 2 different worlds. Even though he was a disciple of the Yongguan family, he could no longer catch Ning Ke's clothes, let alone take revenge on him. Cheers and applause were carried by the spring breeze to the dozens of carriages on the side of the official road on the hillside. The young ladies of Chang'an, who were yearning for love, eagerly opened the curtains, their faces full of hope and worship. Many people, including Cheng Lixue, the priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall, became solemn. In order to watch the battle, all the major cultivation sects in the world came, except for the sadhus of the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom, because they had all been driven out of the country by a decree of the Tang Emperor. These people from the cultivation sects were very interested in Lu Yiqing, who was originally unknown but suddenly gained a great reputation. They wanted to know how powerful the younger brother of the Sage of Sword Liu Bai was. But what they really wanted to see was Ning Ke's performance in the battle. The academy was the only unknown place that was connected to the human world, and it could compete with the divine halls of West Hill. In the minds of those who vaguely knew about the other unknown places, the real top power of the academy was even more terrible than that of the divine halls of West Hill. But the question was, how powerful were the people on the second floor of the academy? Everyone knew that the headmaster of the academy was very powerful, but they didn't know how powerful he was. Only a few people had met Mr. First or Mr. Second of the academy, and they all sighed with emotion afterward, but never revealed any details. For decades, the people of the academy had not shown their brilliance to the world. The reason was that no one from the academy entered the human world after Mr. Ku. Until Ning Ke appeared. After Mr. Ku disappeared from the world, the West Hill Divine Palace forbade anyone from mentioning his name and deeds. However, the strongest man in the world had left too many scars and shocking memories. Therefore, all the cultivation sects in the world wanted to confirm Ning Ke's power and state of mind. The battle between Ning Ke and monk Guanhai of the Lank Temple took place in the Taoist Hall of the Southern Gate Temple. People only knew that it was a time of great brightness, but they did not know the details inside. The battle between Ning Ke and the Yueluan Kingdom Stone had shocked all the cultivation sections. That was because he had defeated a high monk from the Buddhism sect from the unknown place in a battle of psyche. The Buddhism sect's Vedanta ascetic spirit was the strongest in the cultivation world, no matter if it was the Zen psyche or the will. At the end of the battle on Morning Street, Ning Ke had directly chopped off Dao Shi's head. This fact shocked the various cultivation sects and gave rise to some very bad associations. Kill the Buddha and kill the gods. Mr. Ku seemed to have killed his way through and made a name for himself in the academy. Until today, no one dared to disrespect the academy. Even though the legend said that this powerful man had been killed by God, even the West Hill Divine Palace did not dare to openly criticize him. Everyone left their sects and came to the academy. They wanted to use this rare opportunity to personally confirm the true power of the second floor of the academy. In order to prevent another Mr. Ku from appearing in the human world, they wanted to see the academy fail. The title of the weakest world wayfarer in the history of the academy had spread from the mouth of the Tao addict of the West Hill Divine Palace to the entire cultivation world. Even though Ning Ke had won 2 consecutive battles after entering the human world, and even though he had once defeated Prince Longqing, everyone still firmly believed that there was something wrong with these victories. Previously, when they saw Lu Yiqing sitting quietly on the futon, as if he was separated from the world, they were all in awe. They all thought that he was indeed the brother of the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, who had been immersed in the upper see-through state for so many years at such a young age. He even had signs of breaking through the realm. It would be a piece of cake for him to defeat Ning Ke in such a state. However, now that they saw Ning Ke standing on the stone steps and felt his casual aura, they could not help but feel that they had underestimated his strength when they thought of the rumor that he had entered the cave to meditate in seclusion. Cheng Lixue gently stroked his silver-white hair and quietly looked at the side door of the academy at the foot of the hill. He suddenly asked, "Senior brother He, who do you think will win?" He Mingqi smiled and said, "Of course it's Ning Quebec." Cheng Lixue asked strangely, "Why are you so sure?" He Mingqi said, "Because he is a student of the headmaster of the academy." Cheng Lixue suddenly understood and felt that his previous judgment was a little funny. He said, "That's true." Ning Ke stood on the stone steps and looked at the excited classmates in the front yard. He smiled and waved at them. Then he looked at the man sitting on the futon by the side door. The man was very young. He sat on the futon like an old tree with thousands of feet of roots. He gave people a feeling that no matter how strong the mountain wind was, it could not move him at all. Ning Ke knew that this man was Lu Yiqing from the South Jin Kingdom. He had meditated outside the academy for 3 months in order to challenge him. He also knew that this man was the brother of the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. The Yulin royal guards pulled a few extremely long ropes and blocked the crowd outside the ropes. They opened up a large open space in front of the side door of the academy. That open space was under the stone steps. The open space was very big, but Ning Ke and Lu Yiqing were very close to each other. Lu Yiqing stood up and looked at him quietly. After a moment, the futon that had accompanied him for 3 months under his feet broke into pieces. He had sat outside the academy for 3 whole months without the shelter of the cliff cave. He was weathered by the wind, rain, and sun. His hair was tangled and his clothes were full of dust. The nails on his hands that were exposed outside his sleeves were full of black mud stains. They did not look like hands that were used to hold a sword at all. Compared to Ning Ke, who had just showered and changed into a new set of clothes, Lu Yiqing looked more like a beggar. However, the expression on his face was very calm, as if there was not a speck of dust on his clothes. They were even cleaner than Ning Ke's black uniform. Lu Yiqing looked at Ning Ke with extremely bright eyes. He was indeed very tired and haggard. But his sword had been washed in the cold wind and rain outside the side door of the academy for 3 whole months and it was extremely bright. He had waited for Ning Ke for 3 whole months. Today, he finally appeared. This sword that was as bright as spring water happened to have the most majestic sword style. Ning Ke? Lu Yiqing asked. Ning Ke nodded. Lu Yiqing suddenly laughed. As he smiled, the pieces of the futon under his feet floated off the ground. The dust on the ground moved even though there was no wind. It seemed to be rolling in all directions, forming a very strange scene. When the dust rolled further and further away like a snake, gradually leaving the open space, the people watching the battle behind the ropes looked at the dust rushing toward them and subconsciously wanted to step back, but they could not squeeze out. Just when they secretly thought that it was bad, the dust suddenly stopped in front of the ropes. It formed a shallow ridge of soil. Inside and outside the ridge were 2 different worlds. Inside the ridge was the world of battle, and it was not to be disturbed. Suppressed exclamations sounded around the side door of the academy, and then it fell into a dead silence. The dozens of horse carriages on the side of the state highway were also shrouded in a dead atmosphere. The noble ladies in the horse carriages were shocked and tightly covered their mouths. The cultivators in the horse carriages looked at Lu Yiqing in silence, not knowing how to react. They thought about how Lu Bai, the sage of sword, had dared to send his own brother to challenge the academy. This meant that this person's state must be very high and he must be very powerful. Moreover, they had already confirmed that Lu Yiqing was indeed powerful enough. However, they did not expect him to be so powerful. His psyche power moved with his smile, and he could disperse all the dust in the field, and he did it so perfectly. This seemingly strange scene required extremely delicate control of the qi of heaven and earth. The officials of the Imperial Center Administration of the Tang Empire looked at the side door of the academy in silence, their faces full of worry. After Lu Yiqing revealed his state, no one was optimistic about Ning Quebec. Cheng Lixue looked there and also fell into silence. Unlike other cultivation sects, the West Hill Divine Palace, which led the world, had information about Lu Yiqing many years ago, because he was the brother of the sage of sword Lu Bai. Before Lu Yiqing became famous, the West Hill Divine Palace already knew that he was an extremely rare genius in sword Taoism, and put him on the list of key observation. Looking at Lu Yiqing's state, Cheng Lixue realized that this person was even more powerful than what the Divine Hall had imagined. A trace of worry gradually appeared between his brows. Of course, the West Hill Divine Palace did not want another person like Mr. Ku to appear in the academy, but at the same time, they did not want the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom to produce another powerful person, the Sage of Sword Lu Bai. Lu Bai was the chief visiting professor of the Divine Hall, and the South Jin Kingdom was also the Divine Hall's greatest power in the secular world. But if the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom grew stronger with Lu Yiqing's growth, then the Divine Hall's influence on the Sword Garret would be relatively weaker. What if the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom switched positions in the future? So you are a treasure sword that the Sage of Sword has hidden for many years. Cheng Lixue looked at Lu Yiqing in the distance and said bitterly, it seems that even if Ning Ke is the core disciple of the headmaster of academy, he will not be your match today. At the side door of the academy, Lu Yiqing looked at Ning Ke and said, you're finally here. His tone was very calm, but the deepest part of his voice revealed undisguised pride and confidence. This was because he was going to defeat the core disciple of the headmaster of academy today. Then, even in front of the academy, he should finally have his own pride and confidence. According to the usual story, after Lu Yiqing said that he was finally here, Ning Ke should be silent for a moment before replying, what will come, and then he would heroically lose this battle. But Ning Ke had never been a person who played his cards according to common sense. In order to win the battle, he would do anything. Even if he did not take the risk of changing cards, he could choose not to look at his opponent's cards. Ning Ke did not look at Lu Yiqing's sharp eyes. He looked at the untainted blue brick floor, which was so clean that it could reflect one's reflection, and sincerely praised, I'm afraid your sweeping skills are the same as your brother's, the best in the world. This is the 5th chapter. My eyes are blurry and I am very hungry. I am going to rest for a while and eat something before writing. I will try to finish the 6th chapter before 7:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 401. Lu Yiqing was startled, but he did not fly into a rage because of Ning Ke's words. Instead, his eyes showed that he had expected it. He calmly explained, I have been sitting on the futon these days. Although I didn't mean to, it always affected the cleaning of the academy. So I tried to do it myself. But I am familiar with it, so I don't admire it. Ning Ke did not expect that the other party would not be angry. He was surprised and naturally became vigilant, but he did not show it in his expression or words. He smiled and said, I'm more used to using a broom. Lu Yiqing smiled mockingly, thinking that they were going to start bickering again. It seemed that Ning Ke was indeed as rumored. He would never miss any opportunity to disturb his opponent's mood. However, just as he was about to reply, Ning Ke suddenly stopped smiling. He brushed the front of his academy uniform with his left hand and put his right hand in the air in front of him. He said calmly and attentively, please. His posture was very imposing, and the calm and focused expression on his face, coupled with the extremely concise word please, immediately attracted a round of cheers from the crowd. The sudden change in the atmosphere made Lu Yiqing squint his eyes. According to the Cultivation World's description of Mr. 13 of the Academy, Ning Ke, he was a ruthless and decisive person, but he was used to talking nonsense and bickering like a child. The Judicial Department of the West Hill Divine Palace had once commented that all the nonsense, bickering, and childish impulsiveness were just Ning Ke's tricks to disturb his opponent's state of mind. Lu Yiqing thought that he had a deep understanding of Ning Ke's temperament. That was why when Ning Ke said those mocking words that were enough to make many people lose their minds and even vomit blood, he could stay calm. He was even prepared to talk to this person for a long time under the watchful eyes of the crowd. However, he did not expect that the other party would be so direct and simple today. Could it be that he really had some kind of fortuitous encounter after cultivating in seclusion in the cave for 3 months? Lu Yiqing glanced at Ning Ke warily and turned to walk to the center of the clean and dustless ground. As he stepped forward, his emotions gradually returned to the initial absolute calmness. Ning Ke also walked to the field and waited quietly. Everyone's gaze shifted from the academy's side door to the green brick floor as the two walked. When no one noticed her, Sang Sang walked out from the side door. Perhaps because of Tang Xiaotang's identity as a member of the Devil's Doctrine, Chen Pipi and her did not appear. Lu Yiqing raised his left hand. His slender, muddy palm held an ordinary-looking cyan steel sword. He raised his sword and looked at Ning Ke, saying emotionlessly, "I know your most powerful weapon is the arrow. I will still use the sword." Sang Sang stood under the green tree at the edge of the field and listened to his words. She untied the heavy luggage on her back and put the big black umbrella aside. She found the dark iron arrow box and was ready to give it to Ning Ke as soon as he spoke. Ning Ke did not speak. He looked at the ordinary cyan steel sword in Lu Yiqing's left hand and slowly raised his eyebrows. Because he recognized this sword. 2 years ago, when he came to Chang, and from the city of Wei, he and Sang Sang rented a shop on Lin 47th Street and opened the old brush pen shop. At that time, the business of the old brush pen shop was not good, so he clearly remembered who the first customer of the old brush pen shop was. It was raining in Chang on that day. Under the eaves outside the old brush pen shop, a middle-aged man was sheltering from the rain. The man was dressed in a green robe, and his eyes were handsome and free. His smile could brighten up the gloomy rain. The middle-aged man was the owner of the shop and habitually wore a sword on his waist. The reason why Ning Ke could clearly remember the middle-aged man was not only because he was the first customer of the old brush pen shop. On another rainy day, the middle-aged man came to the old brush pen shop with an oil paper umbrella. At that time, Ning Ke squatted on the ground and ate noodles. The middle-aged man squatted beside him and said a few words to him. "I'm going to kill. I need someone by my side." Because of these 2 words, the 500 taels of silver note and darkie's entrustment, Ning Ke followed the middle-aged man into the rainy night and into the shabby Spring Breeze Pavilion street that had not been renovated. Then they began to kill, side by side, until everyone was killed. They walked back to the old brush pen shop and ate a bowl of noodles with fried eggs. The middle-aged man had a very arrogant surname and a very gentle name. His surname was Chao, which was the Chao of the Tang dynasty. His name was Chao Xiaoshu. Ning Ke and Chao Xiaoshu did not meet many times. But he remembered Chao Xiaoshu and would never forget him for the rest of his life. He also recognized the seemingly ordinary cyan steel sword that Chao Xiaoshu carried. But that sword was held in the hands of Lu Yiqing, a powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom. This was not the Spring Breeze Pavilion. Ning Ke looked at the sword and said after a moment of silence, "I won't use arrows today. I'll use a knife." For some unknown reason, he did not ask Lu Yiqing about the origin of the sword. Also for some unknown reason, Lu Yiqing took the initiative to mention the sword. "You recognize this sword?" Ning Ke nodded and said, "This is the sword of old Chao of the Spring Breeze Pavilion." Lu Yiqing looked at him and said calmly, "Don't you want to know why this sword is in my hands?" Ning Ke thought for a moment and said honestly, "Yes." Lu Yiqing seemed to be satisfied with his answer and said, "Old Chao of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. What an interesting name. On that rainy spring night 2 years ago, I think the Spring Breeze Pavilion smelled like blood. You may have forgotten that you had killed a sword master from the South Jin Kingdom." Ning Ke silently recalled the scene on that rainy night. Even though Chao Xiaoshu and he had killed too many people that night, it was not easy to forget that powerful sword master from the South Jin Kingdom. He murmured, "So that person was a disciple of the sword Garrett of the South Jin Kingdom." Lu Yiqing said expressionlessly, "He was the core disciple of my eldest brother, but he died tragically under the joint attack of the 2 of you. There has to be an explanation for this. Chao Xiaoshu was defeated by me, so his sword is now in my hands. But you are still missing, so I waited for you at the gate of the academy for 3 months." Ning Ke's eyebrows had been slightly raised ever since he saw the sword. Even when he was answering honestly, his eyebrows did not fall. However, when he heard Lu Yiqing say that Cao Xiaoshu had been defeated by him, his eyebrows suddenly fell down. His expression was extremely calm, even a little chilly. Lu Yiqing said, "Do you want to know where Cao Xiaoshu is now?" Ning Kei's tone was still very honest. "Yes." Lu Yiqing looked at him and said coldly, "Then show me your true strength and fight with me. Regardless of the outcome of this battle, I will tell you what you want to know." Ning Kei suddenly laughed. After thinking for a moment, he turned around and walked towards Sang Sang, who was under the green tree by the side of the field. Lu Yiqing thought that he was going to retrieve the rumored terrifying iron bow and smiled proudly. Ning Kei walked to Sang Sang but did not move. He was not here to retrieve the primordial 13 arrows, but to retrieve something else that sixth brother had just prepared for him. Because at that moment, he was ready to kill this South Jin Kingdom swordsman called Lu Yiqing. But when he walked to Sang Sang, he suddenly changed his mind. Because sometimes being alive was more painful than being dead. So he walked past Sang Sang and returned to the field. Lu Yiqing looked at him, who was empty-handed, and frowned slightly. He said, "I want to see your true state. I said that I will not use arrows today. I will only use knives." Ning Kei stretched out his right hand and looked at him calmly. "Because you are not worthy." Lu Yiqing still did not get angry. He asked indifferently, "Then who is worthy?" "My iron bow has shot Prince Long Qing and the Tao addict. You are not as good as these two, so you are not worthy." After saying this, Ning Kei took a deep breath and tightened his grip. His right hand grasped the hilt of the knife behind him that was pointing diagonally at the sky. He slowly pulled out the black and long padao. His movement was very normal and casual, but it was firm and did not allow anyone to interrupt him. Just like that rainy night 2 years ago, when a middle-aged man in a green robe killed his enemy in front of him with his sword. He was defenseless in close combat and did not hesitate to give his life to Ning Quebec. Lu Yiqing clearly sensed the change in Ning Kei's aura. But his emotions did not change. His dirty and dusty clothes fluttered in the spring breeze. He was like a bright sword that had been washed by the spring water. His most respected brother had once told him that no matter what kind of enemy he faced, and no matter how the enemy changed, all he needed to do was to pull out the sword and stab into the enemy's body. So Lu Yiqing calmly pulled out the cyan steel sword from the sheath and stabbed straight at Ning Kei's body. It was straight like a stick, like a willow that was frozen in time and no longer swaying. There was no sword style, and no flying sword whistled through the air. This was the simplest sword. But it was the most powerful sword. The sword garret of South Jin Kingdom was different from other sword sects in the world. They did not cultivate the art of swordsmanship. The disciples of the sword garret would never use their psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth, and then use it to control their natal swords. The disciples of the sword garret only trusted the hand that held the sword. Their most powerful swordsmanship was the sword in their hands. With the sword in their hands, they did not need to use the chi of heaven and earth to control it. They could directly gather the chi around the sword. This was the swordsmanship of the world's most powerful sage of sword, Liu Bai. With the sword in his hands, it was like a river. Invincible in front of him was invincible in 10,000 miles. The loneliness of the past years in the private school of his hometown, the cold looks he received after coming to the sword garret, the thoughts he gained after sitting in front of the academy for 3 months, the scornful looks of the Tangs, the angry but silent discussions, and the pride in the depths of his heart, all melted into this one sword. It was such a simple strike, but Lu Yiqing had poured all of his cultivation into it. The air in front of the blade suddenly collapsed and retreated in all directions, creating an absolute vacuum. The few green leaves that danced in the air could not even land on the clean green brick ground before they turned into powder. The chi of heaven and earth outside the side door of the academy shook violently and gathered into the sword in his hands. Then it seeped out from the blade, forming a wind and thunder that whistled. In an instant, Lu Yiqing had crossed the distance between the two of them. The tip of the sword carried the wind and thunder and directly hit Ning Kei's face. This is the 6th chapter. I'm crazy. Then, there's still the 7th chapter. I'll sleep after I finish it. I really don't know when I'll update. I'll try to finish it before 8:30. I have to continue writing after I wake up. Wipe my sweat. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 402. The wind and thunder at the tip of Lu Yiqing's sword shocked all the onlookers. People's exclamations were still brewing in their throats, and there was dead silence. How could such a simple sword contain such a powerful force? Including the cultivators, among the onlookers at the side door of the academy today, only Cheng Lixue, the priest of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace, could really understand this simple sword. He was the only one who had already noticed the horror of Lu Yiqing's sword when he just stabbed. He held the window with his right hand and remained silent. This simple sword was actually not simple. It had the fullest and even the most perfect willpower, with 100 days of waiting and forbearance, and finally had Lu Bai's sword style. Because it was simple, it was powerful. Everything in the world was like this, including Haotian's divine light. Cheng Lixue held the window with one hand and felt the sharp sword style from the side door of the academy. He thought that if he was facing this simple sword, he would definitely not be able to take it. He could only retreat to a place where there was no place to retreat, and use the desperate situation to squeeze out the possibility of the impossible. Even if Prince Longqing was still alive, facing such a simple and powerful sword style, facing the wind and thunder at the tip of the sword, he could only choose to temporarily avoid it and risk being injured to find the last chance of survival and killing. If it was the Tao addict in front of Lu Yiqing's sword, could she block it? Cheng Lixue thought of the news from West Hill and silently added in his heart. Of course it was the Tao addict before she went to the wilderness. Then he denied his own thoughts in his heart. If it was the Tao addict before she went to the wilderness, she would definitely not block this simple sword, but would attack with a straight face. Before she was stabbed to death, the person holding the sword would die first. So she would not die. She could deal with Lu Yiqing's sword. The wind and thunder came, and there was a hidden sword style in it. Facing such a dangerous situation and such a powerful sword, Ning Kei chose to close his eyes. There was only one explanation for closing his eyes at such a moment. That was, he wanted to commit suicide. Ning Kei did not want to commit suicide, so he slashed forward while closing his eyes. He knew that with his current cultivation state, he would definitely not be able to take on this sword. So he did not even think of taking it, nor did he try to attack like Yi Hongyu. Instead, he attacked back. The way he swung his blade was very simple. It was even simpler and more primitive than Lu Yiqing's sword thrust. This was because the saber itself was simpler and more primitive than the sword. Swords were deliberately forged by humans to be used as weapons of salute or slaughter. The sword could stab people, but it couldn't stab anything else. The saber was a stone saber that humans picked up from the heavens and the earth. It was first used for hunting. A saber could be used to chop people, but it could also be used to chop many things, such as firewood. Ning Kei felt the heavy weight from the hilt and the subtle reverberation of the blade cutting through the air. A sense of firmness and reliability that he had not felt for a long time returned to his body. He had not chopped firewood for a long time, and he missed it very much. Today, he was chopping wood again. Although his eyes were closed, his movements were still as skillful as ever. It was so skillful that it felt natural. It was so natural that it made people feel comfortable. Only Lu Yiqing, who was facing the blade, felt very uncomfortable and even uncomfortable. Ning Kei's movement was natural as he slashed forward. With a flick of his wrist, the majestic great spirit in his body flowed along the hilt and madly into the blade. Even if it was a treasured saber from the imperial palace, it would instantly disintegrate into countless metal fragments after being injected with so much great spirit. However, this new blade, which had been tempered by sixth brother and had the weight of 3 padeos, was able to withstand the pressure. The slender blade began to tremble at a terrifying speed that could not be seen by the naked eye, as if it would break at any time, or as if it would endure everything in silence forever. A buzzing sound. Previously, when Lu Yiqing had revealed his state, the black brick floor seemed to be spotless. However, at this time, the finest ash in the cracks of the black bricks was shaken out by Ning Kei's saber momentum and scattered in all directions. The people of Chang and who were watching the battle could not see what was happening at all. The scene in their eyes was still at the moment when Lu Yiqing's wind and thunder sword was about to pierce Ning Kei's face, and the saber in Ning Kei's hand was just an ordinary saber in the air. Only cultivators with a high state could clearly feel that there was a majestic aura of heaven and earth dancing around the padao in Ning Kei's hand. The amount and purity of this aura of heaven and earth was even more terrifying than the qi of heaven and earth absorbed by Lu Yiqing's wind and thunder sword. Cheng Lixue also held onto the window with his right hand. His body was tense and his face was full of shock. He Mingqi, who was standing by the carriage, suddenly looked up and held the wheel with his right hand. The green leaves in the air that were crushed into powder by Lu Yiqing's sword style turned into nothingness when they touched the saber wind. A wildflower that was peeking out from the crack of the stone steps in the distance disappeared in an instant. Ning Kei's saber and Lu Yiqing's sword finally met. The saber momentum was so majestic that it suppressed the wind and thunder on the tip of Lu Yiqing's sword. It trembled uncontrollably, as if it was a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. Lu Yiqing was shocked. He did not expect that Ning Kei, who was the weakest person on the second floor of the academy and was even labeled as the shame of the academy by the Tao addict, could display such a powerful cultivation at this time. But he did not intend to retreat or stop his sword momentum. The sword in his hand was still moving forward. That was because he had been meditating at the side door of the academy for 3 months. He was fully prepared for what might happen in this duel, including Ning Kei's sudden increase in state after his hard cultivation. He firmly believed that when Ning Kei's saber and his sword met, there would definitely be a slight delay. Because as long as one was human, he would definitely think. As long as he thought, Ning Kei would think of Cao Xiaoshu from the sword in his hand. Why was Cao Xiaoshu's sword in his hand? Did Cao Xiaoshu really lose to him? Was Cao Xiaoshu alive or dead? If Cao Xiaoshu was alive, would Ning Kei still be able to cut him down with his saber? Weren't you worried that Cao Xiaoshu would die with me after this cut? Did you think you could stop thinking by closing your eyes and not looking at the sword? Lu Yiqing thought coldly. He firmly believed that Ning Kei could think. Even if Ning Kei had an inhuman willpower and could ensure that there was no delay in the movement of the saber, there would definitely be a gap in his state of mind. When strong people fought, they fought for victory and defeat were often decided by a single thought. Lu Yiqing knew that he could seize the gap in Ning Kei's state of mind, and he had been preparing for this for a long time. However, Ning Kei's movement did not stop at all. He closed his eyes and chopped down in front of him with his saber. The chopping was so decisive and ruthless. His thoughts did not stop either. The reason why he closed his eyes was not because he did not want to see Cao Xiaoshu's sword. He did not even think about whose sword it was. He did not even think that Cao Xiaoshu might be dead or imprisoned in the sword garret. If he chopped down with his saber, Cao Xiaoshu might really die. He did not think about anything. he just wanted to chop down the saber in his hand. This kind of thinking was very simple. Much simpler than Lu Yiqing's thinking. So much more powerful. The pedao in Ning Kei's hand suddenly became brighter. Countless golden rays of light shot out from the dark blade, like a sun leaping out of the sea of clouds, or like a burning cloud in the twilight. The golden rays shot out from the blade were gathered by Ning Kei's psyche power. They did not scatter around, but turned into a flame and hit Lu Yiqing's face directly. Cheng Lishue's hands, which were holding the window frame, suddenly tightened and stood up in the carriage. With two cracking sounds, the window frame was smashed, and a big hole was made in the carriage. He Mingqi, who was standing beside the carriage, did not notice the movement behind him. His right hand, which was holding the wheel, was so nervous that his knuckles sank deep into the wheel, and sawdust flew everywhere. The two looked at the side door of the academy in shock and shouted in disbelief, "Divine skill!" A shrill scream came from the brick ground in front of the side door of the academy. Thousands of rays of light from Ning Kei's pedao hit Lu Yiqing's face like flowing fire. The pure Haotian's divine flame reflected in his eyes, and then pierced into his sense of perception, causing him a sharp pain. However, his eyes felt real pain, and all light disappeared in an instant. The world became dark. No matter how strong his sword heart was, he could not help but lose focus, and the momentum of his sword was disrupted. The pedao in Ning Kei's hand hit Lu Yiqing's sword. The momentum of the pedao was overwhelming. The wind and thunder on the tip of Lu Yiqing's sword suddenly disappeared like smoke. The burning pedao continued to cut down. The sword in Lu Yiqing's hand broke into countless pieces. The momentum of the pedao continued. Ning Kei closed his eyes and struck. He only knew Lu Yiqing's original position. Therefore, when the pedao fell, it did not hit Lu Yiqing's body, who was screaming and retreating, but hit the brick ground. But as long as it was cut down, it was enough. The burning pedao hit the ground heavily, and countless sparks flew. The Haotian's divine flame on the pedao suddenly exploded, turning into a terrifying aura of heaven and earth, and hit Lu Yiqing's body through the air. The wind was strong. In this extremely vast aura of heaven and earth, Lu Yiqing's body was like a sandbag in a hurricane, lightly flying up and landing heavily on the hard ground. He rolled a dozen times in a row in a sorry state, only stopping when he hit a peach tree at the foot of the hill. There was a cracking sound, and it was unknown whether it was the peach tree or his bones that broke. Lu Yiqing held the peach tree with his trembling right hand and stood up with difficulty. At this time, his clothes were torn, and his body was covered in blood, stained with dust. It was a terrible sight. The peach blossoms that had bloomed for some time fell like rain, sprinkling on his body. The color was even thicker than the color of blood. The most terrifying thing was that his eyes looked as good as before, and even had the cold sword style from the beginning. However, looking at his blank expression, he could not see anything. After a moment, Lu Yiqing finally woke up from his muddle-headed state. Only when he was awake did he begin to feel fear, and because of the extreme fear, he began to go crazy. He looked at the sky with his blank eyes, and held the remaining hilt of the sword tightly in his hand, as if holding the last life-saving straw. He kept waving it around crazily, and shouted hoarsely, "How can you use divine skill? Who taught you divine skill? I will go to sleep after settling the accounts." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. In terms of strength and state, he was definitely not weaker than Ning Quebec. Even if he might be defeated in the battle because of a momentary slip, he should not be defeated so miserably and without the ability to fight back. Lu Yiqing used to think that the reason why Ning Ke could defeat Long Qing, Guan Hai and kill Dao Shi was not because he was stronger than them, but because he was lucky and cunning. He had been preparing for this battle for 3 months. Whether Ning Ke used the horrible iron arrow or the divine talisman left by Master Yen Sei, he had already prepared a way to deal with it. However, he did not expect Ning Ke to use a knife. From the beginning to the end of the battle, he only used his saber. He only used one stroke. Lu Yiqing believed that if Ning Ke had not hidden Haotian's divine light in his saber, he would not have been unprepared and lost so miserably. Looking at the dark night in front of him and recalling the process of the previous battle, he was filled with grief and indignation. He thought that if they fought again, he would definitely win. Lu Yiqing leaned against the peach tree, his listless eyes falling somewhere. He held the remaining hilt of his sword tightly in his hand and shouted to the hillside in a trembling voice, "Come on. Let's fight again." Ning Ke looked at him quietly and suddenly said, "You have already lost. Why should I fight with you again?" Lu Yiqing heard his voice and quickly turned around. He looked over with his horrifying white eyes and almost fell down. He shouted, "Because you cheated, so I am not convinced." Ning Ke looked at him and said calmly, "How did I cheat?" Lu Yiqing's left hand trembled and stroked the rough trunk of the peach tree. He wanted to hold it tighter to make his body more stable. He said in a trembling voice, "This is the academy, and you." Before he finished his words, Ning Ke interrupted him and asked, "The academy? Do you think I, a student of the second floor of the academy, have the geographical advantage? We are in the south of Chang'an, surrounded by Tangs, so you have lost the harmony of the people. Or is it that today is the day I break out of seclusion, when my spirit is at its peak, so you have lost the timing?" Looking at the resentful expression on his face, Ning Ke sneered and said, "Don't forget that you have been waiting at the gate of the academy for 3 months. The whole world knows that you have been waiting for the day I break out of seclusion. So the location and the time of the battle are chosen by you. So why are you not convinced?" Lu Yiqing's body trembled slightly. The blood in his tattered coat mixed with dust and dripped to the ground. Ning Ke had never shown any mercy to his enemies. Although he had turned away from Sang Sang today and did not take out that thing, which meant that he had spared his opponent's life in advance, his original purpose was to make his opponent suffer more than death. So how could he not suffer a mental blow after the victory? So, if you want to be dissatisfied, you should not be dissatisfied with me, but with your stupid thinking ability. You shouldn't have blocked the gate of the academy and provoked our pride. You shouldn't have taken out Chao Xiaoshu's sword to provoke my killing intent." Hearing this, Lu Yiqing suddenly laughed crazily. Snot and tears flowed down his face. He pointed at Ning Ke with the sword hilt in his hand and shouted hoarsely, "I know you are cold-blooded and heartless, but I have underestimated how heartless you are. You clearly saw Chao Xiaoshu's sword in my hand, but you did not care about the safety of the person who once helped you. You did not even leave a gap in your mind. I have been practicing swordsmanship for many years, and I have a heart of steel. Today, I have met someone colder than me. I should not be convinced that I have been defeated by you." The proud young powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom finally admitted defeat for the first time after today's defeat. However, his words were still very bitter and full of despair and mockery. Ning Ke looked down at the dust on the bluestone bricks under his feet. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Lu Yiqing. He said, "First of all, Chao Xiaoshu and I are just acquaintances. We only talk about fried egg noodles and money. We don't talk about gratitude or hatred. Secondly, I don't know how his sword fell into your hands, but I know that an idiot like you can't possibly defeat him. What right do you have to use this sword to disturb my mind? What right do you have to be unconvinced? It's the toughest before the finish line of a marathon. I'm working hard. Let's start with 2000. The next chapter will be out before 1. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 404. Ning Ke walked towards the peach tree. Hearing the footsteps, Lu Yiqing became nervous. He held the hilt of his sword tighter and looked around in panic. He had said that he was unwilling to give up and wanted to fight again. However, when Ning Ke walked towards him, he realized that he was seriously injured and blind. He could not even defeat an ordinary person, let alone Ning Quebec. Ning Ke stopped in front of Lu Yiqing and looked at his bloody and dirty face. He said, "I know you are still unwilling to give up. Because you think that I hid my strength and was too cunning." Lu Yiqing's body trembled slightly. He pursed his lips tightly and used his strong willpower to stop himself from moaning in pain and falling unconscious because of his injuries. This young powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom used his silence and posture to show that he was still unwilling to give up. Actually, that's because you don't know what a battle is. You thought your sword move was simple enough, but it wasn't simple at all. Because you thought about it for 3 whole months. You thought about how to deal with my arrows and talismans. You wanted to confuse me with words and Xiao Shu. Ning Ke looked at him and said, "And I didn't use talismans or arrows. I didn't even use any skills. I didn't think about Xiao Shu or the sword in your hand. I didn't care about the relationship between you and the Sage of Sword. I didn't fear you, I didn't despise you, I didn't use words to test your will to fight, and I didn't use any tricks to confuse you. I just pulled out the knife from the sheath and slashed at you." Lu Yiqing understood a little and his body trembled more violently. Ning Ke looked at him and said, "That's the real simple." After a moment of silence, Lu Yiqing said with a smile, "I understand." Ning Ke said mercilessly, "You don't understand at all. Simple thinking is the real simple. You thought too much. That's why you lost to me. And you said too much." Lu Yiqing leaned against the peach tree. His body shook and he almost fainted. Ning Ke didn't stop. He looked at him and continued, "Before the battle, you said that if I fought you with all my strength, you would tell me where Xiao Shu was. That was a stupid thing to say." At this point, he paused for a moment and looked at the blood-like peach blossoms under Lu Yiqing's body. He said, "Even if you don't tell me where Xiao Shu is, I will still beat you into a pile of dog shit. You threatened me just to make me more aware of the necessity of beating you into a pile of dog shit. Now that I have beaten you into a pile of dog shit, I'd like to see if you will tell me where Xiao Shu is. I'd like to see how you can still be unconvinced." Lu Yiqing finally understood why he had lost today. Although he was still unwilling, he had no choice but to admit defeat. However, as he listened to his opponent's incessant taunts, describing him as a pile of dog shit, and then thought of his heavy injuries and blind eyes, he immediately felt resentment. After a moment, the resentment turned into helplessness. As the appointed leader of the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom, he had lost to his opponent in front of the world. Moreover, he was blind and would never be able to recover his cultivation state. He might not even be able to hold a sword again. How could he avenge himself in the future? The pride in Lu Yiqing's heart gradually disappeared after this fiasco and Ning Ke's calm but ruthless post-battle analysis. He looked at the darkness in front of him and imagined the bleak future. His chest was filled with despair and his willpower suddenly collapsed. He leaned against the peach tree and sat down again. His right hand no longer had the strength to hold the sword hilt. Because Ning Ke's words destroyed the last straw. Ning Ke took a step forward and picked up the sword hilt. He looked at it silently for a long time. This was indeed Xiao Shu's sword. Of course, Xiao Shu would not lose to someone like Lu Yiqing. Then why did his sword end up in the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom? During the battle, Ning Ke did not think about anything else in order to keep his state of mind clear and firm, and in order to make his chop as simple as possible. Now that the battle was over, those inauspicious judgments instantly poured into his mind, making his hand that was holding the hilt of the sword tremble slightly. After the bloody battle in the Spring Breeze Pavilion, many people in the world thought that Ning Ke and Cao Xiaoshu were close friends and very familiar with each other. That was why they could fight side by side while bathed in blood. However, Ning Ke knew that was not the case. The relationship between him and Cao Xiaoshu was that of the landlord and the tenant. It was like the relationship between the leader of the underworld in Chang'an and a hired killer. Or as he had said to Lu Yiqing, it was the relationship between a customer and a customer. The two of them could be described as romantic, but they had never talked about it. Most of the time, they talked about money and fried egg noodles. That was why he and Cao Xiaoshu were not that close. They had only met a few times, and he had never even been to Cao Xiaoshu's home. However, there would always be one or two people in the world who came out of nowhere. They would casually walk into your life and say a few words to you. Then, the two of them would live and die together. It was like when Cao Xiaoshu walked into the old brush pen shop on a rainy day. It was also like when Ning Ke and Zhuo'er met in the village in the Yan territory. This kind of relationship was very faint, so faint that they might not have any contact for many years. Sometimes, they would occasionally exchange letters. Even if they met on a bustling night boat, they would just raise their cups of wine and talk about the matters after parting before parting again. This kind of relationship was very strong. It was so strong that when they met again after many years, they would look at each other on the street and smile. Then, they would take the knife that the other person handed to them and fight against the endless enemies. And when you knew that the other person was in danger somewhere in the world and needed your help, no matter if you were taking the imperial examination or marrying a princess, you would throw away the brush in your hand without hesitation. You would tear up the examination paper on the table, push away the officials in charge of the palace examination, rush out of the imperial city, take off your new festive clothes, ignore the beautiful and shy bride by your bed, and ride a horse thousands of miles away. Ning Ke looked at the sword hilt in his hand and remained silent. He did not know where Cao Xiaoshu was now and what kind of situation he was facing. He suddenly realized that the fact that he was not familiar with Cao Xiaoshu was a beautiful premise. Because of this, he did not know if Cao Xiaoshu was a person who believed that as long as the sword existed, he would die. Because of this, he did not have to confirm that Cao Xiaoshu was dead. Ning Ke raised his head and looked at Lu Yiqing, who was sitting under the peach tree like a dead person. He tightened his grip on his knife and took another step forward. He slowly and firmly raised his knife. The audience exclaimed. They did not expect that Ning Ke would kill this man from the South Jin Kingdom. In the crowd, Professor Huang He frowned and shook his head worriedly, indicating that he should not act recklessly. I can only gnaw on it for 22,000 yuan. This is the hardest bone. The next chapter will be out before 3 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 405. Ning Ke heard the exclamations of the crowd. As a Tang, he knew that it was not a glorious thing to kill an enemy after he had surrendered. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Professor Huang He's worried expression and shaking his head. He knew what the professor was worried about. If he killed Lu Yiqing under such circumstances, it would be equivalent to forming an unresolvable feud with the sword Garrett of South Jin Kingdom, especially with the world's most powerful sage of sword, Lu Bai. Ning Ke had never thought of killing Lu Yiqing, because he wanted the South Jin Kingdom to live a life worse than death. Now that Lu Yiqing was blind, he was satisfied with the result. But he looked at Lu Yiqing, who was sitting under the peach tree with a pale face. He slowly and firmly raised his padao, as if he was going to chop down at the next moment. That was because he was very clear on one thing. Even those who had fallen into a situation worse than death still didn't want to die. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a situation in the world. The more determined and powerful a person was, the more they believed that they could escape from this predicament, and the more greedy they were for life. Lu Yiqing looked miserable and desperate. But there was no doubt that he was a man with a strong will, so he definitely did not want to die. Ning Ke wanted him to feel that he was going to die soon, so that he could achieve his goal. As expected, Lu Yiqing felt the cold knife style coming from above his head. He felt Ning Ke's undisguised killing intent. His body suddenly stiffened and he said hoarsely, "You want to kill me? As long as the sword lives, the man lives. If the sword dies, the man dies." Ning Ke said, "Chao Xiaoshu's sword is in your hands, so he must be dead. Since I have broken the sword, would I let you, who killed him, live?" Lu Yiqing felt fear. He struggled for a moment and said, "I did not kill Chao Xiaoshu." Ning Ke looked at him and said, "With your cultivation state, you could not hurt Chao Xiaoshu. But who knows if you used any dirty tricks?" Lu Yiqing smiled nervously and said, "Chao Xiaoshu has already entered the knowing destiny state. Do you think those dirty tricks can be used against him?" Ning Ke said, "But his sword is in your hands. Since we all agree that Chao Xiaoshu is strong enough, there seems to be only one possibility." Lu Yiqing seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly became nervous and did not want to say another word. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "Lu Bai did it himself?" Lu Yiqing did not answer his question. Ning Ke looked up at the peach branch with broken petals and suddenly said, "Tell me what happened at that time. Tell me Chao Xiaoshu's current situation, and I won't kill you." Lu Yiqing frowned and fell into an intense struggle. Right at this moment, a clamor suddenly arose from the nearby crowd, and the faint sound of an intense argument could be heard. Hearing the voice, Lu Yiqing was slightly refreshed and looked up. His eyes were blinded by Haotian's divine light and became even more terrifying because of his pride. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Do you still dare to challenge my brother?" Ning Ke looked at him and shook his head. He said, "Lu Bai belongs to my second brother, not me. Of course, if Lu Bai is beaten into a pile of dog shit by my second brother, I don't mind stepping on him." Hearing this, Lu Yiqing's face twisted in shock. In his entire life, he had never heard anyone dare to mention his elder brother in such a tone. His elder brother was the strongest person in the world, the sword Saint Lu Bai. No matter if it was an enemy or a friend, when the sword Saint Lu Bai was mentioned, they would involuntarily show some respect. Who dared to say that the sword Saint Lu Bai would be beaten into a pile of dog shit by someone like Ning Ke? Some time had passed since the end of the battle. The onlookers saw Ning Ke walk to Lu Yiqing, but they could not hear what they were saying. They only saw Ning Ke's posture of wanting to kill Lu Yiqing, so they exclaimed. The Divine Hall's ambassadors and the sects by the side of the road were all silent. The South Jin Kingdom's ambassador and 2 disciples of the Sword Garret ran down the hill in a panic, wanting to stop this from happening. The Yulin royal guards had already pulled up a long rope to guard the side gate of the academy. Other than the 2 participants in the duel, no one was allowed to enter. Both sides immediately quarreled fiercely. The South Jin Kingdom's ambassador said angrily, "We admit defeat if we lose, but why won't you let us in to treat Master Lu? What are you Tangs trying to do?" The Tang Empire was the most powerful country, followed by the South Jin Kingdom. Therefore, the people of the South Jin Kingdom were used to seeing the Tangs as opponents. However, the Tangs did not even care about the South Jin Kingdom. The Yulin royal guards were the proudest group of people in Chang'an, and they even turned a blind eye to the ambassador's anger. The conversation about Chao Xiaoshu was between Ning Ke and Lu Yiqing, so they did not purposely raise their volume. Therefore, the onlookers of Chang'an and the students of the academy did not hear it. However, the cultivators in the horse carriages by the side of the road heard it clearly. Chao Xiaoshu's name used to only be famous in the underworld of Jianghu. However, after the battle at the Spring Breeze Pavilion, his name suddenly spread throughout the cultivation world. Only then did all the sects know that there was a hidden powerhouse in the Tang Empire, and that this powerhouse had entered the knowing destiny state not long after. Chao Xiaoshu had actually been killed or imprisoned by the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom. Their faces were still filled with longing because they were only mortals and could not see the details of the battle between these cultivators. In their eyes, the battle had ended with Lu Yiqing stabbing and Ning Ke chopping. Not understanding did not mean that they would not talk about it. This was destined to be the most sensational duel in the world in recent times. It would definitely be retold by the people of Chang'an, and eventually become a more exciting and thrilling legend that was completely different from the real situation. In the days to come, there would definitely be many people discussing Ning Ke's simple and unparalleled slash in the wineshops and sects deep in the mountains. And it might even become a distant memory of the people in Chang'an. Dozens of horse carriages on the official road gradually left the academy. Only the horse carriage that belonged to the West Hill Divine Palace's diplomatic corps was still there, looking a little lonely. Cheng Lixue did not leave. He walked out of the broken carriage and came to He Mingqi's side. He looked down at the side door of the academy, his brows full of confusion. The side door of the academy was tightly shut. There were some blood stains on the green brick ground in front of the door. There were several short ridges formed by dust around it. They had previously proved Lu Yiqing's strength, but now they seemed a little ridiculous. Is it really possible to cultivate in talisman and martial arts at the same time? Cheng Lixue frowned and looked in that direction, thinking hard. As the priest of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace, he had a profound state of Taoism and was even more knowledgeable. However, he had never read about cultivating in talisman and martial arts at the same time in any ancient books. Of course, he had never heard of anyone successfully cultivating it. Even if you cultivated in seclusion in the cliff cave for 3 months and combined the two into one, why did you use my West Hill divine skill when you chopped at the end? Cheng Lixue asked himself a question. This was the same question that Lu Yiqing had asked in a trembling voice when he was blinded and in a panic. How could Ning Ke know divine skill? Who taught him divine skill? He Mingqi, who was standing beside him in silence, seemed to have heard the voice deep in his heart. He said softly, Ning Ke is a student of the headmaster of the academy. Then everything is possible. According to the records of the West Hill Divine Palace and the descriptions of the divine priests on the Peach Mountain, the headmaster of the academy seemed to be an omnipotent person. Cheng Lixue felt that this inference was valid, but vaguely felt that this matter was not so simple. He thought of the little girl he saw just now. The little girl standing under the shadow of the big green tree. Then he seemed to understand. Dawn is ahead, I will eat first. The next chapter will be out before 4:50. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 406. The West Hill Divine Skill was the most sacred and supreme Taoist magic of Haotian Taoism. It was even called the origin of Taoist magic. Different from the divine skill used by the deacons of the judicial department who patrolled the world, this divine skill was not a specific cultivation method, but a divine weapon given by Haotian to the cultivators. The disciples of Haotian Taoism who could practice the divine skills on Peach Mountain did not necessarily have the highest aptitude for comprehension, but they must have the purest Taoist heart and the strongest faith in Haotian. Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, was able to cultivate the divine skills because she had done these two things. Prince Long Qing's faith in Haotian was firm enough, but he could not keep his Taoist heart clear because of the royal affairs of the Yan kingdom. So even he could not cultivate the real divine skills. For some reason, Cheng Lixue could not cultivate divine arts either. Therefore, he could not understand why Ning Ke could do it. Until he remembered the little girl who had been standing quietly under the big tree. He recognized the little girl because she was the reason and purpose why the great divine priest of revelation led the West Hill diplomatic corps to Chang'an. So he thought he had guessed the truth. There was a courtyard deep in the wetland of the academy. Ning Ke and Chen Pipi stood on the bank of the wetland outside the courtyard. Perhaps it was because Tang Xiaotang was asked to practice by senior sister Yu Lian, Chen Pipi was silent. He lowered his head and stared blankly at the water plants in the wetland. After some time, he suddenly raised his head and said to Ning Ke, that divine light came from the blade. Ning Ke knew what he wanted to express. After a moment of silence, he said, "Special Taoism?" Chen Pipi shook his head and said, "The West Hill divine skill is not like this." Ning Ke frowned slightly and said, "I used a divine talisman to inject Haotian's divine flame into the blade. That's why the divine flame came out of the blade when I waved it. What do you think of this explanation?" "Nothing much." Chen Pipi reminded him seriously, "In the beginning, your blade was wrapped with the qi of heaven and earth. It's my first time. I don't have any experience." Ning Ke said sincerely, "There will be no such loopholes in the future." Chen Pipi mocked, "Do you really think you can deceive the world for a lifetime?" Ning Ke asked, "Even if they sense something wrong, who can find evidence for this?" Chen Pipi thought about it and shook his head. "Not really." Ning Ke relaxed and said, "That's good." Right at this moment, a shrill and miserable howl suddenly resounded in the courtyard, and then the howl came to an abrupt end. Silence ensued, and the two of them looked at each other before turning around and walking into the courtyard. In a secluded room in the courtyard. The old woman in the blue gown looked at Lu Yiqing, who was rolling on the bed in pain. She shook her head and put away the needles and other medical items in her hand, saying, "I can't do it anymore." Second brother nodded slightly and said, "Thank you." The door was pushed open, and Ning Ke and Chen Pipi walked in. Lu Yiqing gritted his teeth and endured the pain in his eyes. His left hand tightly gripped the wooden bar beside the bed and shouted, "What the hell do you want to do?" White bandages were wrapped around his injured eyes. Ning Ke looked at him and said, "You should be very clear." Hearing Ning Ke's voice, Lu Yiqing's face, which was not covered by the white bandages, revealed a vicious expression. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "You blinded my eyes today, and I will definitely pay you back in the future." Ning Ke had always been a person who refused to be at a disadvantage, whether it was in a sword fight or a verbal battle. Hearing this person threatening him, he said, "If you really want to take revenge, why wait until the future? You can kill me now, because you know that I really want to kill you." Lu Yiqing did not expect that he would use words to express his killing intent. After a slight stiffening, he said in a cold voice, "My eldest brother is the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. How dare you kill me?" Cultivators paid attention to their state of mind and willpower. Once they started to reveal their background, except for people like Ning Ke who did not care about manners, most people would feel desperate or even collapse. However, Lu Yiqing did have some hope and confidence. The Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, was indeed too famous. Although the Academy would not be afraid of him, it seemed unnecessary to provoke the world's strongest powerhouse. At this time, second brother, who had been standing quietly, suddenly said, "Since you are Lu Bai's younger brother, the Academy will not treat you harshly. Please rest assured. Lu Yiqing knew that the owner of this voice must have a high status in the academy. He might even be the rumored Mr. First or Mr. Second at the back of the mountain of the academy. He sincerely said, "Thank you for your care." "You're welcome." He was not being polite, but because second brother was an upright gentleman and did not want to lie. Moreover, he did not think that what he had done was worthy of being thanked. He said, "Because I plan to let you stay in the academy to recuperate." Lu Yiqing was stunned and asked with the last hope, "Then when are you willing to let me go?" Second brother thought for a moment and said honestly, "I will let you go when Lu Bai releases Cao Xiaoshu. If Cao Xiaoshu is dead, then you will never have to leave." Lu Yiqing heard the seriousness in second brother's words. The pain in his eyes and the fear of being imprisoned in the academy made him even more panicked. He said anxiously, "Cao Xiaoshu is really not in the sword garret. He is not dead." Eldest brother is in seclusion, so I could only take his sword and hurt him. Then he ran away. Ning Ke finally knew that Cao Xiaoshu had met the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. Ning Ke finally knew that Cao Xiaoshu had indeed encountered the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai. Naturally, he was no match for him. No wonder his sword was taken away. But how serious was his injury? Second brother suddenly asked, "How can you prove it?" The room was silent. Lu Yiqing said, "Isn't it proof that Cao Xiaoshu is not in the sword garret?" Second brother said, "How can you prove that Cao Xiaoshu is not in the sword garret? How can you prove that he is still alive?" Lu Yiqing thought that no one knew where Cao Xiaoshu was. How could he prove it? The more he thought, the more anxious he became. He said, "How can the academy be so unreasonable?" Second brother said calmly, "A debt must be paid. A life must be paid for a life. A prisoner must be kept alive. You can only leave when Lu Bai can prove that Cao Xiaoshu is not with him and is still alive." The old woman in the blue coat said lightly, "I will write a letter to Lu Bai and ask." Second brother was slightly stunned and said, "Thank you." Walking out of the courtyard and to the wetland, Ning Ke could not suppress his curiosity. He wanted to ask second brother about the relationship between the old professor who liked to clean the academy and Lu Bai. Unexpectedly, second brother did not give him a chance to speak. He patted his shoulder with a smile and said, "Not bad." Second brother had always been a serious and courteous person. He paid particular attention to filial piety and fraternity. He treated his teacher as warm as spring, eldest brother as warm as summer, younger brothers and sisters as cold as autumn, and his enemies as cold as winter. He rarely smiled or praised people like Ning Ke and the others. Therefore, looking at the smile on senior brother's face, hearing the two words, "Not bad," and feeling the strength from his shoulder, Ning Ke's legs gave way and he almost fell to the ground. He felt extremely comfortable. Chen Pipi pursed his lips enviously. Second brother turned around to look at Chen Pipi. The smile on his face had long disappeared. He said seriously, "Although you entered the academy earlier than youngest brother and have a higher cultivation state, you are not as good as him in some aspects. As the saying goes, there is an order to understand the Tao. When you get the Tao, you have to forget your identity as senior brother and learn from him." Chen Pipi thought, "When did you forget your identity as senior brother to learn from me? And what do I, a genius, need to learn from Ning Ke?" Although he thought so in his heart, he showed a respectful expression and repeatedly agreed. Ning Ke asked a little unconfidently, "Senior brother, what's good about me?" Second brother looked at him with satisfaction and said, "Finally, you told that person that one day, I will beat Lu Bai into a pile of dog shit. Such foresight and courage are very good." After a moment, Chen Pipi looked at second brother's back and said faintly, "I thought you wanted me to learn something. It turns out that you just like to flatter me." Ning Ke patted his shoulder and comforted him, "It's all knowledge, all knowledge." In Chang'an, the Southern Gate Temple in front of the imperial city was as quiet as usual. However, compared to the past, the quietness of the Southern Gate Temple was more tense and somber today. There was no one walking in the beautiful Taoist temple complex, but in the streets outside the Taoist temple, there were many experts from the Tang military and the Imperial Center administration hiding. Recently, the defense of the Southern Gate Temple was even tighter than that of the Imperial Palace. It was not the Imperial Court's fault for being nervous. It was because the bigwig who lived in the Southern Gate Temple was too respected. If anything happened to the bigwig in the Tang Empire, the whole world would probably fall into the flames of war. The great divine priest of revelation of the West Hill Divine Palace lived here. In the Taoist temple deep in the Southern Gate Temple, an old man in a gorgeous divine robe sat in the depths of the dark wooden floor. His closed eyes were surrounded by wrinkles like dry land. Cheng Lixue, the priest of the Revelation Department, knelt respectfully in front of the old man. When junior brother Long Qing was destroyed by him, the Divine Hall thought that it was because of the terrifying divine item provided by the Academy. Even when Monk Guanhai and Dao Shi were defeated by him, no one thought that he was very strong. Cheng Lixue organized the words in his heart. After a short pause, he continued respectfully, "Today, I watched his battle with Luiqing and confirmed that he should have entered the upper see-through state. Compared to when we met in the wilderness, his cultivation state is improving at a terrifying speed." The person who could make Cheng Lixue so respectful was naturally the great divine priest of revelation. The great divine priest of revelation slowly opened his eyes. The deep wrinkles at the corners of his eyes gradually stretched out as he opened his eyes. It was like a dry land that was moistened by the spring rain for a night. The headmaster returned to the academy and can personally guide him. If his cultivation state still improves at the speed of an ordinary person, then it will be truly terrifying. The great divine priest of revelation looked at his disciple in front of him and asked, "But why is he able to cultivate the divine skill?" Cheng Lixue said, "I am wondering if it has something to do with junior sister Sang Sang." The great divine priest of revelation looked at him quietly and said, "How can you prove it?" "Actually, I am in a very bad state today because of some things. But when I wrote this chapter, I was very happy. When second brother said how to prove it, there is still one more chapter. I will continue. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 407. Cheng Lixue shook his head after a moment of hesitation. The great divine priest of revelation recalled what had happened many years ago and said indifferently, "Then do you know that Mr. Ko from the academy once showed his divine skills to the world?" Cheng Lixue was shocked speechless. He was already confused that there was someone else who could cultivate the divine skill other than the West Hill Divine Palace. He could barely accept what had happened to Ning Ke because of Sang Sang. But now he heard from the great divine priest that someone in the academy had already mastered the divine skill many years ago. This was really unacceptable, even if that person was the legendary Mr. Ko. The great divine priest of revelation said, whether Ning Ke learned the West Hill divine skill from Sang Sang or found the key from Mr. Ko's legacy, it made no difference to Haotian Taoism. But Mr. Ko's faith in Haotian can't be so firm. How could he cultivate the divine skill? If Ning Ke learned the divine skill from Mr. Ko, what is it exactly? Cheng Lixue said blankly, "Even if Ning Ke is Uncle Yen Sei's disciple, we still have to be more vigilant." What is faith? This is a very complicated question in itself. As for what is called firmness, that is something that only the great Hao Tian can judge for himself. The great divine priest of revelation said indifferently, your question is not the responsibility of the Revelation Department. It is a question of the Judicial Department. Write a letter to the West Hill later and let them handle it themselves. Cheng Lixue nodded and thought of the message from the West Hill a few days ago. He frowned slightly and said, I heard that the great divine priest of judgment has not recovered from his injury. Recently, his mood, the great divine priest of revelation looked into his eyes and said, the three departments of the divine hall each have their own responsibilities. You'd better stay away from the judicial department. Don't dirty yourself with that basin of dirty water. Cheng Lixue heard this and asked in surprise, I don't understand. The great divine priest of revelation looked at the dark floor in front of him, as if he was looking at the dark prison in the depths of Peach Mountain. He sighed and said, when the judicial department instructed Xinguan Taoism to publicize Liu Bai's name, they wanted to make the Sword Garret angry. Today's battle at the gate of the academy started because of this. Even the key points were planned by the judicial department. However, these people who are used to conspiracies and violence never understand that this is a matter between the academy and Liu Bai. It is wrong for the divine hall to intervene. The more they do, the more mistakes they will make. It was only then that Cheng Lixue realized that the West Hill Divine Palace had done something behind the scenes. The great divine priest of revelation lowered his eyes slightly, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened. He said slowly, Senior Brother Guang is gone, and I am old. Seeing that something big is about to happen in the judicial department, I feel a little uneasy. Cheng Lixue asked nervously, since we already knew that something big was going to happen, why can't we stop it in advance? The great divine priest of revelation raised his head and looked at him lovingly. He said, You have followed me for more than 20 years, and you have been in the revelation department for a long time. Don't you know that the so-called revelation is just an order from heaven? We may know some things in advance, but that is what Haotian wants us to know. Stop it in advance? Wouldn't that be against heaven? What's more, the event of the judicial department might not be a bad thing for the divine hall. The Jishou Abbey was an unknown place. Not many people knew of the existence of this dilapidated Taoist temple. Even those who knew of the existence of the Jishou Abbey did not know that this Taoist abbey, which was high up in the clouds of Haotian Taoism, was in a deep mountain not far from Peach Mountain, quietly looking at the magnificent and solemn Taoist temples. In the first thatched hut by the lake behind the Taoist temple. The lake breeze blew through the window again, opened the cover of the hand scroll of the tomes of arcane, and stopped on a certain page. The middle-aged Taoist by the table looked at the name on the page in silence. The middle-aged Taoist had been in charge of the tomes of arcane for many years, but he had never seen such a thing happen on the hand scroll. 3 months ago, the name disappeared. Yesterday, that name appeared again, but it did not appear in its original place. Instead, it was flipped by the lake wind. Sometimes it appeared on the previous page, and sometimes it appeared on the next page. It did not stop until it finally returned to the first page, but its position had changed. The name suddenly appeared on the top of the book from an inconspicuous corner, like a firework rising from the wilderness, and was about to touch the sky in an instant. From the lower see-through state, you are about to see the threshold of the knowing destiny state. The headmaster of the academy is really amazing. The middle-aged Taoist looked at the restless name and said with a smile, I have been in charge of the tomes of arcane for many years. Your speed of improvement can be ranked in the top 5, but your elusiveness is definitely the first. Not far away, the name of Prince Long Qing was as faint as usual, but the last stroke of the word Qing seemed to be thicker than before, as if someone had added a stroke of ink. The middle-aged Taoist did not notice the change of Prince Long Qing's name. All his attention was on the restless name. Then, he looked up at the top of the tomes of arcane and nodded with satisfaction. The name Yi Hongyu was hanging there, as if it could break out of the paper at any time. It looked extremely aloof and arrogant, leaving all the other names on the page far behind. Between the cliffs of the Peach Mountain of West Hill that seemed to have been split by a divine axe, there was a Taoist temple made of countless huge black rocks. A green figure stood quietly at the stone steps in front of the temple, looking extremely small. After returning from the wilderness, it was unknown whether it was because she was tired of the blood-like red, or because she wanted to cover the two horrible wounds on her shoulders. Yi Hongyu was no longer wearing the beautiful bright red dress. Instead, she wore a loose green Taoist robe like the lowliest Taoist servant in the Divine Hall. The deacons of the judicial department of the Divine Hall looked at her in front of the temple with complicated expressions. There were despise, sadness, pity, mockery, disdain, and anger. Most of them were negative emotions. In the past, she was the Grand Master of the Judicial Department and above all others. She was the Tao addict who was praised by the entire Haotian Taoism. She was proud and indifferent. Although she handed over the specific affairs of the Judicial Department to Prince Long Qing to handle, she would not show mercy when her subordinate deacons made a mistake. At that time, everyone in the Judicial Department was in awe of her because of her coldness and strength. But now, everyone knew that the Tao addict was no longer the Tao addict of the past. She was no longer powerful, so she was no longer cold. Therefore, no one was in awe of her anymore. They even deliberately looked at her with mockery because of some kind of emotion. For the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane, the West Hill Divine Palace had invested a lot of manpower in the wilderness last year. The specific affairs were handled by the Judicial Department. In other words, it was Yi Hongyu who was in charge. The Judicial Department had planned for a long time, but in the end, they failed miserably. From the commander of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall to the strange disappearance of the two black deacons, the destruction of Prince Long Qing, and the failure to snatch the Tomes of Arcane, the Judicial Department, which used to be cold and powerful, actually seemed so weak. No one in the Divine Hall cared about the fight for the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. In the end, it had long been out of the scope of cultivation power in the world. It had evolved into a story among the world wayfarers of the Academy and other unknown places. Now, Yi Hongyu was not qualified to participate in that level of battle. She should not participate in that level of battle. Everyone thought that since Yi Hongyu was the Grand Master of the Judicial Department, then the failure was her responsibility. The West Hill Divine Palace believed in the light of Haotian. However, the Taoism Hall was not necessarily completely bright, especially when the Judicial Department walked in the dark and worshipped power the most. Therefore, as long as Yi Hongyu was still the powerful Tao addict of the West Hill Divine Palace, then these things would not affect her at all. The problem was that Yi Hongyu herself had a problem. During the trip to the wilderness, she met the terrifying Master Lotus at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He used the practice of Tao Tai to devour her flesh and blood. At the moment of life and death, she used the secret method of Haotian Taoism to forcefully lower her state in exchange for a moment of powerful brilliance. Finally, she joined hands with Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan to walk back from the brink of death. However, she had just entered the knowing destiny state in the snow cliff. Before her state had stabilized, she forcefully lowered her state again, which caused an even more terrifying counterattack. Since leaving the wilderness, her state had been constantly falling, and she could not even stay at the upper see-through state. According to the current trend, she might fall to the lower see-through state or even lower levels before her cultivation could finally stabilize. What was more terrifying was that she might not have any hope of returning to the knowing destiny state in this lifetime. If the Tao addict was no longer powerful, would she still be the Tao addict? The people of the Judicial Department, who respected power, naturally did not respect her as they used to. However, Yi Hongyu became more and more silent and calm in the face of the changes in her body. She moved into a quiet and remote stone house, as if she wanted to send a message to everyone by doing so. However, the more she did so, the more people felt that she was no longer qualified to be respected. The people in the West Hill Divine Palace looked at her with more and more complicated expressions. The ridicule in many people's eyes became more and more obvious. There was even a saying in the judicial department. Prince Long Qing was dead, and so was the Tao addict. The girl in green standing in front of the hall was just a good-for-nothing named Yi Hongyu. A deacon walked out of the judicial temple and gently invited her in. Yi Hongyu nodded slightly and then calmly walked into the Black Taoist temple. The interior of the Black Taoist temple was spacious, and there was a curtain woven from pearls and jade in the deepest part. Yi Hongyu walked very slowly, and it took her a long time to reach the curtain. Behind the curtain was the divine throne carved from a whole piece of South Sea ink jade. The color of the jade was like solidified blood. The great divine priest of judgment sat on the divine throne with her hand on her forehead. She seemed to be resting and did not speak. Yi Hongyu stood quietly outside the curtain and did not speak either. There was not even a trace of wind in the spacious Taoist temple. The silence continued. She understood something. Then, she slowly lifted the front of her green Taoist robe and knelt in front of the great divine priest of judgment. Everyone in the judicial department had to kneel before the great divine priest of judgment to show their obedience and respect. In the past, only the Tao addict could not kneel because she was proud and powerful. But she was not the Tao addict now, so she had to kneel, and she had to kneel more respectfully than others. Blowing kisses, blowing kisses. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.